Chapter 198. Dake looked at the lazy and coquettish Deanna. He shook the Christmas candy gift in his hand and asked with a smile, "Do you mean you don't want your Christmas present?" Deanna covered her mouth and said in surprise, "Isn't the Christmas present the chocolate box?" She licked the corner of her mouth as if she was savoring the sweetness and bitterness of the chocolate. Dake said, "That is a present for everyone in class. And this is the only one for you." Deanna, the only one? Deanna's radar instantly scanned the keywords. She opened her eyes wide and no longer felt sleepy. Her eyes were as bright as the moon. It was not the first time Dake came to Deanna's bedroom. The poor panda familiar was still playing the role of a doll in the corner. The little dress it was wearing was getting more and more fancy. "Is this the Christmas present for me?" Deanna grabbed the candy gift and her eyes were filled with excitement. The website was https://m. But can't you? VIP obviously. The candy gift was much more attractive to her than the other present in Dake's hand. Dake looked at her helplessly. Then he twisted the button-like eye and waved it in front of her eyes. "Button, what's wrong?" She was confused. Dake had to explain. "This is the prize I got from the Halloween costume party. It is the eye of a zombie doll bear. If you use it well, it may be a great way for you to get a 4-star magical elf." 4-star? Deanna's eyes lit up. "Then I will." Dake frowned and said seriously, "Study it carefully. You are too exaggerated." Deanna said, "Girl's word." After reminding Deanna not to use the precious bear eye, Dake left with Claire's weekly travels. Next is Luosi. He turned and walked to Luosi's room and patted it lightly. The sound was transmitted into the bedroom through the door. Luosi obviously reacted faster than Deanna. Although she was also wearing pajamas, her bangs had already been combed. Dake didn't go into her bedroom. Instead, he took out Claire's travels and handed it to her. "This is Professor Claire's travel book. It's signed." Luosi immediately showed great interest. She asked, "Would you like to come in and have a seat first? I have a Christmas present for you too." Dake had originally planned to leave after sending him off, but after some consideration, he still walked in. Luosi's cat grass dragged its round body over, and Dake couldn't help but put it on his lap and stroke it. This Garfield cat was so meaty that it felt especially good to touch. There was no need to worry about getting sick from being too fat. It was simply the best in the world. Luosi knew that Dake had 3 pots of cat grass in his bedroom. He was a real cat lover. She took out a gift box from the drawer and pushed it in front of Dake. Dake looked at it carefully. He felt that the gift box was just the right size to put 2 books, but it obviously didn't contain books. What could it be? Guessing before revealing the Christmas present was one of the great joys of Christmas. However, Dake guessed several times and Luosi said that it was wrong. She blushed and stopped Dake from opening the gift box. "Let's go back and see." Dake didn't understand, but he did as she said. As soon as he went out, he saw Deanna opening the door and looking out. Deanna saw him and waved at him. "Dake, I haven't given you your present yet." Speaking of Deanna's present, Dake couldn't help but recall Deanna's sudden question last night. "Dake, do you like bears?" He couldn't help but have an ominous feeling. She won't really give me a bear plushie, will she? From entering to leaving the house, Dake took a total of 2 minutes. He didn't have a bear plushie in his hands, but he had a bear pillow. Deanna gave him a bear pillow the size of his body. What the F***CK? Dake took advantage of the empty corridor and ran back to the dormitory with the bear pillow in his arms. If someone saw him like this, his heroic image as the son of a duke would be ruined. When he got back to the dormitory, he threw the bear pillow on the bed and picked up Luosi's present. The gift box was flat and square. What's in it? When Dark recalled Rose's flushed cheeks as if she had drunk alcohol, he felt that the things inside were definitely not simple. However, after he opened the box, he found that it was just a set of thermal underwear. One gives a pillow, the other gives underwear. Dake didn't have the energy to complain. He thought about how to send AI Ma's Christmas present to the Night Academy. It would be great if I could meet her in the library. But it's Christmas now. No matter how hard she studies, she still has time to rest. Maybe it's a good idea to let the little magical beast go in from the balcony? He glanced at the little magical beast and felt that it would work. The present for AI Ma was a box of apple juice. It was very heavy. Dake tied a rope to the box so that the little magical beast could use its claws to grab it more easily. However, it didn't have enough strength to fly. After a while, it couldn't move anymore. It was easy to solve this problem. Dake took out Pride Eye. Under the effect of Pride Eye, the little magical beast's strength increased for 15 minutes. It was more than enough to pull the box of juice. But before that, he needed the Dilu beast to help move it. After finalizing the plan, Dake walked to the tower of the Night Academy. When he reached the front of the tower, he summoned the little magical beast and used Pride Eye on it. The little fiendish beast, which had gone from being powerless to having the strength to truss a chicken, finally managed to grab the juice and fly up in a wobbly manner. The first-year students lived on the second floor. It was easy to find AI Ma's dormitory. Sure enough, in less than 10 minutes, the little magical beast completed its task. Did I give it to the wrong person? Dake was worried. The little magical beast patted its chin and said, I, the little magical beast, have never made a mistake. Dake. However, Emma had woken up an hour ago. When the little magical beast flew to her house with the box, she was wearing fluffy otter pajamas and reading on the balcony. She was shocked. Then she opened the balcony's grill and moved the box of apple juice in with the little magical beast. It tastes surprisingly good. Is this really handmade? AI Ma tasted the apple juice and felt that it was incredible. In her impression, Dake was almost omnipotent. But there was a limit to being omnipotent, right? How could he make juice taste so good? She felt that she fell in love with the taste of the apple juice. But after drinking it, AI Ma had to face a serious question. What should she give in return? Dake returned to the dormitory and counted the last gift list. There's still Professor Kazair, Professor Lili, and Professor Shi-Erfa left. Let's give them all. At this time, the probability of the professors staying in the dormitory was higher. Dake summoned the Dilu beast again and left with the 3 gifts. He was very familiar with the way to the professor's dormitory, and he had the key card left by Claire. Dake found Professor Kazair's dormitory first. He had a good relationship with Professor Kazair, but of course this was the first time he visited his dormitory. Knock, knock, knock. Who is it? The professor's voice came from inside. He sounded very awake. Dake said, It's me, Professor. Dimu? Professor Kazair opened the door and revealed a crack. After seeing that it was really Dake, he said in surprise, Why are you here? Dake took a small gift box from the Dilu beast and shook it in front of Professor Kazair. Merry Christmas, Professor. Professor Kazair touched his messy hair and sighed. Merry Christmas. Then he opened the door a little more, just enough for one person to pass through. Dake walked into the room and looked around. Professor Kazair's room was surprisingly clean, but every piece of furniture was one size smaller. He put the book The Old Knight of the Border on the table and said, Professor, do you like reading novels? Professor Kazair shook his head, occasionally. Dake pointed at his head and smiled. Then read more. Good novels are good for divergent thinking. Kazair couldn't help but grin. Are you saying that I'm stubborn? Dark laughed dryly, thinking that the professor was indeed a professor. He could even tell something like this. Kazair shook his head. I don't usually read novels, but since it's a Christmas gift from you, I'll finish reading it. Oh right, wait, I have something here that I can give you in return. Dake asked curiously, what is it? Professor Kazair, wait. Then he rummaged through the cabinets and finally found a ring. The ring was small and made of black metal with 3 holes. Seeing the arrangement of the 3 holes, Dake immediately thought of a bowling ball. Well, it was a magic ball. Professor Kazair tossed the ring over and said, This is a magic ring. You can use it to train how to conduct magic power remotely and manipulate a magic ball remotely. Dake caught the ring and observed it carefully. Judging from its texture, it was indeed very similar to a magic ball. He didn't expect it to be a related item. He hesitated and said, Isn't the conduction of magic power a subject for the 2nd year? Is there a problem with my studies? Professor Kazair glanced at him. You have plenty of extraordinary items on you, don't you? Don't worry, you have enough magic power for the training. As for the specific method, You'll have to do it yourself. Okay. Dake put away the magic ring. I'll look it up in the library. Professor Kazair nodded in satisfaction and was about to see him out. Dake tactfully left first. Then Professor, I have to visit Professor Li, so I won't stay any longer. Kazair waved his hand. Go. Dake, __buy. A novel in exchange for a magic ring. It was a great deal. Dake's mood immediately improved. Professor Li and Professor Shi-Erfu's dorms were on the other side. He walked for a while and found the room marked, Heartsuit Li Heartsuit. I don't know why, but I feel like I'm helping a tyrant by giving her wine. Dake shook his head and knocked on Professor Li's door. Unsurprisingly, no one responded after knocking for a long time. He stood at the door and mumbled. Then there are two possibilities. One, she's not here, and the other, she's drunk again. The latter is more likely, right? Little devil? Little devil immediately obeyed. Coconut, Sir Scout, come out. Dake, go. The little devil beast wore its beloved scarf and flapped its wings to fly around. It came to the balcony and saw the little goblin lying on the table drunk like a dead pig. She's so worrisome. Little devil shook his head and scolded, then immediately went back to report. Dake glanced at the door lock and made a difficult choice between entering or not. In the end, he had no choice but to enter. Professor Li, are you done? I'm coming in. If you don't answer, I'll take it as a yes. Magic summoning. 100 transformations universal lock. Get tick. Gotcha. He opened the door a crack. A strong stench of alcohol gushed out from the crack of the door, as if it had finally found a vent. Dake quickly covered his nose and bravely rushed in, risking his life to die from the smell. The romantic atmosphere of the Christmas party was a fatal poison for Li. She didn't wait for the ball to end and returned to the dormitory early. She touched the flower card alone and drank to drown her sorrows. She drank herself from a fragrant little vixen to a stinky little vixen. This wasn't the first time Dake had to deal with this situation, but today's situation was especially bad. Not only did she get drunk, she also knocked over the wine bottle. There were remnants of alcohol on the table, floor, and everywhere. The alcohol on her body had already dried, making her dress wrinkled. Dake frowned and had to summon Trash Slime to quickly deal with it. After Trash Slime cleaned up the alcohol, he also neatly arranged the wine bottles. This made her look a lot more comfortable. You really don't let people have peace of mind. Dake stretched out his hand and stroked Li's wrinkled dragonfly wings. He turned to Beast and said, So I'll leave the rest to you, is that okay? Beast spoke in human language, of course. Dake nodded and said, Then I'll go out first. Little Devil Beast? Little Devil Beast immediately followed. One person and one pet guarded outside the door. Inside the door, the Beast easily moved Professor Lily to the sofa. Then, it took off her clothes that were full of wine stains and took out a set of pajamas from the wardrobe as a backup. Then it threw the dirty clothes into the laundry basket and moved Professor Lily into the bathroom to wash her. Finally, after a quarter of an hour, the smelly little devil beast returned to her fragrant state. Beast changed her into her pajamas and threw her into the bed. Little Lily, who was treated roughly, was still drunk like a dead pig and didn't have any reaction. Beast pinched its nose and sniffed. It found the deodorant and sprayed it all around the room. Then it opened the windows to ventilate everything in one go. When Dake and Little Devil Beast entered the room again, the whole room had changed. It finally had a bit of a warm home smell. Sigh. Dake sighed and put the morning dew, with a Christmas card on the bedside table. It took one last look at Lily and helplessly left the room. Slip away, slip away. There's only one left, Professor Shi-Erfu. Among all the professors, Professor Shi-Erfu could be said to be the hardest to get along with. She always had a straight face and was used to using the silence card. She was hard to communicate with from head to toe. Dake's relationship with her was quite ordinary, so he didn't plan to give her a Christmas gift. To be honest, it would be a bit awkward to suddenly visit an unfamiliar teacher. But since he accepted the mission worth 3,000 credits, Dake still had a certain professional integrity. He looked at the remaining bottle of green wine in his hand and estimated the relationship between Simmons and Professor Shi-Erfu. He wondered if he would be cursed by the wind spirit if he gave out this bottle of wine. But after he pondered for a while, the door to Professor Shirfu's dormitory opened automatically. A slightly lazy voice came from inside. "You're standing outside without knocking? Did you do something bad and want to turn yourself in but don't dare to?" Dimu. A Professor Shirfu was someone who would say something like this. Dake suddenly felt that he didn't really know anything about this professor after this semester. Was it because she always used a rigid attitude to hide herself? Professor. Dake didn't think too much about it, and closed the door after he entered. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas. Well, it's been a long time since a student came to give me a Christmas gift." Professor Shirfu looked at the bag in Dake's hand, and felt somewhat gratified. Dake raised the magic ring on his finger and turned it. "They don't know what a blessing can be exchanged for." Professor Shirfu chuckled. "Then what else did you get besides this old ring?" "The smell of alcohol from Lili?" Dake could clearly feel that Professor Shirfu seemed to be a completely different person during the holidays. He said helplessly, "What a loss, what a loss." Professor Shirfu raised his finger and said, "Take out my gift and take a look. I'll try my best to give you something of equal value." Dake took the opportunity to take out the indigo wine from the gift bag. The green liquid swayed slightly and reflected a faint light under the sunlight. Professor Shirfu's expression froze. When he came back to his senses, his face was already stern again. "Where did you get this wine?" Dake knew that she would ask this question. According to the previous plan, Simmons only hoped that Professor Shirfu could drink the indigo wine that he brewed himself, and he would be satisfied. Therefore, he asked him to make up a small tavern here. After all, the indigo wine was a cheap wine that could be bought anywhere. However, Dake didn't want to do that, because it wasn't part of the mission. He said solemnly, "Uncle Simmons from Traveler's Street begged me to give it to you." Shirfu frowned. "He's still in that smelly corner?" Dake thought for a moment and said, "He said that he would always be there." The corners of Shirfu's eyes twitched. He turned his head and looked out the window. From Dake's angle, he couldn't see her eyes anymore. She said sternly, "Take the wine back and tell him to get lost." Dake shook his head and said, "I can't do that. I accepted his reward. I can't return it." Professor Shirfu. "What reward?" "I'll give it to you." Dake. "Morning dew, 8 desolation." Professor Shirfu instantly turned around and said in astonishment, "He actually gave you these 2 bottles of wine." Dake was startled. He saw that the corners of her eyes were a little red, and he knew what was going on. Dake. "Morning dew comforts the sorrow of love. 8 desolation gifts the hero. Green seed connects the family." Shirfu thought for a moment. "You gave them to Lili and Claire respectively?" Dake. "Professor, you can do that." Professor Sylph's tone suddenly softened. "Leave the wine. I'll give it to you as a Christmas present." As she spoke, she flicked her finger. A gust of wind whirled and flew to Dake's palm. Dake closed his fingers, and the gust of wind with a green glow came out of his fingers. Professor Shirfu explained, "That's the blessing of the wind spirit. It can help you withstand a disaster." As he spoke, the gust of wind entered between Dake's eyebrows, leaving only a bit of coolness. Dake suddenly realized that his hearing had become much clearer. No wonder Professor Shirfu knew it was him just by standing outside the door. This gust of wind was priceless. The wind spirit should belong to the flight system, right? If I refine it, what can I refine? After leaving the teacher's dormitory, Dake couldn't help but think. But just as this thought came to his mind, he suddenly heard a gust of wind coming down from above. This made him subconsciously take a few steps forward. Then there was a paw sound. Something thrown from the sky. A black shadow flashed upstairs. The wine danced with the dregs of the bottle at his feet. Dake didn't feel good. This was the green seed wine. Professor Shirfu first gave him a gust of wind blessing, and then threw the green seed wine down from above? If it wasn't for his quick reaction, wouldn't that strand of priceless blessing of wind have been wasted in vain? What kind of hatred caused this father and daughter tragedy? Dake still had lingering fears and decided not to get involved for the time being. Anyway, the lifespan of the elves was long enough. Let the father and daughter slowly grind it out. Time to leave. Afternoon. Dake appeared in a small tavern in the corner of Travelers Street. Simmons seemed to be waiting for his good news. But he could only bring bad news. You're saying that she smashed the wine? Dake originally thought that Simmons would be flustered and exasperated, but not only was he not angry, he was even dancing with joy. Good. Good. All right. After saying okay 3 times, Simmons wanted to close the door and drink. Dake could not help but ask, "So what's so good about it?" Simmons laughed loudly and said, "Everything is good. You know what? This was the first time in many years that she had such a big reaction to something I gave her. Well done, well done." Dark. Smash to the max? Simmons. Yes, awesome, awesome. Dake. Goo goo goo. Simmons. Goo 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 goo. Dake. Crazy, this person is crazy. 3 in 1, 6,000 words. Although there were some twists and turns in the process since yesterday morning, there have been 22,000 words in 9 chapters, so this month. Chapter 199. No matter what, at least Simmons himself looked quite happy. Perhaps to him, this was already the best Christmas present. Dake quietly left the tavern. The Christmas celebration in Travelers Street was unprecedentedly grand. It was packed with people since noon. Walking on a slightly more secluded path, his ears were still filled with the endless laughter of the crowd. But at this moment, his heart gradually calmed down. Although the war had ended, the remaining sorrow did not stop. The peace and laughter today were exchanged for by the sacrifice of the older generation. Whether it was Professor Li or Professor Shi Erfu, they all left behind irreparable regrets. The weather on Christmas was unexpectedly good. Remember the website, MVIP can't you? VIP. When Dake returned to the dormitory, he was stopped by someone in the common lounge. Dake Dimung, someone gave you a gift. The second-year girl named Mary was reading on the sofa with her long legs crossed. After stopping him, she pointed to the 2 gifts on the table. Dake walked over in surprise and said politely, "Thank you, senior." Mary made a gesture of thanks and then continued to read her book. Dake picked up the 2 gifts from the table and was a little curious. Who else would give me a Christmas present? One of the gifts he could think of was AI Ma's return gift, but he had no idea about the other one. It couldn't be Eudora, right? But Eudora was a classmate of the Aristocrat Academy. She shouldn't need this senior to pass it on, right? So who gave it to him? Dake didn't open it immediately. Instead, he found a seat in the common lounge and sat down. At this time, most of the students were playing in Travelers Street. The common lounge was very empty, and he didn't have to worry about being disturbed. He put the 2 gift boxes on the table and picked them out in a good mood. The gift on the left was a square box wrapped in pink. It was a little girly. It was very likely AI Ma's. The gift on the right was wrapped in a Christmas gift box. It was quite heavy. Of course, the surprise has to be left for later. Dake picked the pink gift and then opened the packaging, revealing a gift box. He opened it again, revealing a smaller gift box. He opened it again, revealing a smaller gift box. Then he opened it again. Trying to play this game with me? Black lines appeared on Dake's forehead. In the end, he opened 9 boxes in a row before he saw the real gift. It was an ancient gold coin. This ancient gold coin was not standard enough, but the material used was very special. The portrait on the front was a little blurry, but one could vaguely make out that it was wearing a crown. It should be the king of that time. On the back, there was a building similar to a golden pagoda, which reminded people of the 8 murals. Everything made sense now. The 8 murals did not appear out of thin air. It was because AI Ma entered the secret passage that the mural appeared. Dark was just a third party who had interfered. He frowned slightly and picked up the Christmas card under the gold coins. On the small card, there was a simple drawing of the image of a Christmas girl, and beside it was the name, AI Ma Métis, written in ancient characters. Sure enough, it's a gift from AI Ma. This is bad. The value of this ancient gold coin was much more valuable than a box of apple juice. He could not accept an unequal gift from someone of the same age. However, it's not good to be too calculative about a Christmas gift. I'll think of a way to repay it in the future. He put away the Christmas card and the ancient gold coin. Dake's gaze turned to another gift. Not to mention anything else, this gift was really valuable. He did not look at it anymore and directly opened the gift box. This time there weren't any strange designs. There was a whole set of books lying quietly in the gift box. It was the super best-selling book series, Alibaba's 14 Ways to Slay a Dragon. And from the 1st to the 7th, there were a total of 7 books. Who gave this to me? Dake was a little surprised. He immediately picked up the Christmas card that was placed on top of the book. It was a very ordinary storefront style, the same type of gift Dake received when he bought things. He opened the Christmas card and saw the names of the donors. White and Luo Boat. Dake looked at it repeatedly and confirmed that it was indeed a gift from the two of them. He could not help but be surprised. Have they not given up on improving my favorability? No matter what, he had to give something in return. Dake thought for a while, and put the whole set of Alibaba's 14 Ways to Slay a Dragon in his dorm before leaving again. That night, when White and Luo Boat returned from Traveler's Street, they received a gift from Dake from a classmate. The two of them looked at each other, took the gift into White's dorm, and stared at it for a long time. Luo Boat said hesitantly, "We received a Christmas gift?" White nodded slightly and said bitterly, "Yes, it's the first gift other than ours." Luo Boat suddenly realized, "That's not right. As long as we give a gift, we will get a gift in return. Why should we wait for others to give us a gift first?" White. In fact, even the set of Alibaba's 14 Ways to Slay a Dragon was given to Dake by accident. White had thought about using a Christmas gift to gain Dake's favorability 2 months ago, but because of the crisis of trust in taboo love, he gradually forgot about it. So he originally wanted to give this set of super popular books to Panduola as a Christmas gift. But after he finally mustered up the courage to ask a senior from the Magic Institute, he learned that Panduola had gone on a long trip last night. Naturally, he could not give her the gift. Christmas gifts were time-sensitive, so if they could not be given today, they would lose their meaning. White was very disappointed. But since he had already bought the gift, he could not just throw it away, right? Thanks to Luo Boat's reminder, he remembered the mission to unlock favorability. As long as he raised Dake's favorability to 80, he would unlock a reward. Even though he did not want to give the gift to Dake at the time, under Luo Boat's urging, he still gave it to Dake. But he did not expect Dake to give him a gift in return so quickly. One for each of them. Luo Boat. What kind of gift is this? White. It looks like a book. Luo Boat thought for a bit and said, "Because we gave him a book, he gave us a book. That's reasonable." White. Let's not guess, just open it and see. Luo Boat. Together? White. Yes. So the two solemnly opened the 2 gifts at the same time. Instantly. Nothing happened. There were indeed books in the gift box. The two read out the title of the book at the same time. Luo Boat. Dake Diming's Notes on Magic Potions. White. Dake Diming's Notes on Arithmetic. Add a chapter that was updated yesterday. Add a character design as compensation. Poor author, please don't complain. The design has been melted down. Chapter 200. This, White and Luo Boat were both stunned. The two of them had many guesses, but never would they have thought that Dake's Christmas gift would be 2 notebooks. Luo Boat asked in astonishment, "Why would he give us notebooks?" White's face turned ugly. "Maybe he thinks this is what we need." Luo Boat shrugged. "He definitely doesn't know how hard we studied when we were locked up. These notebooks are of limited use to us." Victor flipped open the arithmetic notes in his hand and said, "This is a photocopy. The original should be the notes he made during class. From the beginning of the first class to the end of the last class. I'm afraid this is the entire semester's worth of arithmetic notes." But as he flipped through the pages, he suddenly went silent. Luo Boat was puzzled. "What's wrong, White?" White. "I don't understand." Luo Boat. "What?" White. "I actually don't understand. It's clearly the notes from the first semester, but I can't understand them?" "No way." Luo Boat also hurriedly flipped through the potioneering notes in his hand. In the beginning, it was fine as it was just a normal excerpt from the blackboard. But later on, there was suddenly a lot of knowledge that was beyond the scope of the syllabus. From this notebook, They could clearly feel that Dake's potioneering skills were rapidly improving. If they could thoroughly study this notebook, they would definitely benefit a lot. White. Luoboat looked at White and hesitated. Although it's amazing, we'll learn these things in the second semester, right? White thought for a bit and nodded, probably. It would be too exaggerated if it was more than a grade. Luoboat sighed. Then we'll just have to pay attention in class next semester. I really can't study by myself with a notebook. White, me too. Also, I have things to do tomorrow. Luoboat. What things to do? White. Enter the secret passage again. In the tower of the noble house, Dake was reading Alibaba's 14 Dragon Slayer styles with some interest. After he received this gift, he thought for a bit, and went to Traveler's Street to print 2 copies of the notebook to give to White and Luoboat. Gifts naturally had to be given to someone who needed them. As for what Victor and Robert would do with the gifts after receiving them, that was none of his business. At this moment, as the first-year students of the Aristocrat Academy returned from Traveler's Street one after another, he had received a large number of additional Christmas presents. Although they were all chocolates, candies, biscuits, cookies, and other things, the amount of Christmas gifts was enormous. So much so that he was already considering whether he should call Diana over to deal with it. He thought carefully. There were 4 most useful gifts he had received this Christmas, and they were as follows. 1. Reverse Scale Magic Ring Blessing of the Wind. 4. Ancient gold coins. In terms of quality, it could only be described as a good harvest. But Dake always felt that he was missing something. He tapped the book, and was a little distracted. This Alibaba's 14 Dragon Slayer styles was a story that happened in an ancient civilization in the last century. Alibaba, a poor woodcutter, accidentally stumbled into the Fairy King's maze on his way to cut firewood. He went through hardships, broke out of the maze, and also got the treasure of the Fairy King. 14 dragons, who had been eyeing the treasure of the Fairy King, heard the news and came. In order to protect the city, which was threatened by the dragons, Alibaba had to use the treasure of the Fairy King and kill the 14 dragons in 14 ways. The whole story was clear, the structure simple, but the narrative was vivid. There was a detailed description of the cultural background and the harsh environment at that time. It was not only a best-selling story, but also an exquisite book that could take readers into the book world and experience the rise and fall of ancient countries. Through the surface of entertainment, one could learn a lot from the inside. After Dake finished the first episode, he closed his eyes and savored it. 2 minutes later, he opened his eyes and was ready to continue watching the second episode. But just as he opened the second episode to the table of contents, a little light flew in from outside the window and went straight into the half-open ventilation window. Dake glanced at it and let down his guard. It was a griffin-like elf, one of the major elves of the principal of Aertii. At the academy assignment ceremony, it was this elf who gave him the academy card, so he had a deep impression of it. What's the matter? Dake's tone was quite gentle. The griffin elf circled around the room a little, as if to confirm that there was nothing indecent. After confirming, it flew back to Dake and began to glow and transform. As the glowing body grew longer and longer, a breathtaking body stretched out. The principal of Aertii appeared in front of Dake. Even without makeup, she was still beautiful. Merry Christmas. Ding. The principal of Aertii spoke through this temporarily transformed body. Dake finally remembered what he had missed. He shrugged and said, "A belated greeting, Principal. Well, Merry Christmas." The principal of Aertii pushed the silver hair that fell on her chest to the back of her head, a trace of tiredness appearing on her face. "Sorry, I've been very busy recently." "So you weren't the real you last night? You're really something, Cynthia St. Aertii." Dark suddenly noticed the Hua point. Suddenly, there was something stuck in his throat that he had to spit out. The principal of Aertii ignored his strange expression and asked with concern, "Did you find the treasure left by Yvette?" Dake shook his head. "I'm going to look for it tomorrow. It's a good way to pass the time." Aertii. That's reasonable. Dark. Why don't you just tell me what the treasure is, Principal, so that I can satisfy my deep love for my mother? If you know, you don't have to go. Aertii shook her head. I don't have the bad taste of prying into other people's secrets. Whether it's Yvette or Brett, their treasures are left for students who are fated to find them. I'm already overstepping my boundaries by giving you the treasure map. As for the secret of the treasure, you'll have to find it and decipher it yourself. Decipher it? Dake realized that he had caught on to another key word. But since the principal of ARDI couldn't provide him with information about the treasure, Dake hoped that she could deliver it as soon as possible, and then say goodbye. However, the principal of ARDI seemed to want to treat tonight as a rare leisure time after her busy schedule, and kept chatting with him about random things. She was like an old woman who had lived alone for a long time, and suddenly caught a child who had mistakenly entered her backyard. She couldn't stop talking. Dake had the mentality of respecting the old and loving the young, so he chatted with her until 10 at night. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Dake was just wondering who would visit so late at night when he saw the principal of ARDI turn back into a griffin and fly to the top of the cabinet to hide. Are you a thief? Dake's mouth twitched, but he still went to open the door. Standing outside the door was the present. Another chapter updated yesterday. A new day after 6. Continue to update, yesterday. Chapter 201. She appeared. A lowly with ribbons on her head. Dake subconsciously wanted to close the door, but after thinking about it, he pulled her in. Eudora was only 11 years old. Her height only reached the bridge of his nose. Although she was wearing clothes, they were very thin. It was a very transparent pink pajamas with lace. It was cold, and she was in a bad state. Although her cheeks were rosy, it was more like she was sick. Her slender limbs trembled slightly. She was obviously feeling cold. If he let her stand outside, she might have a problem with the cold. Dake pulled her into the warm room and pulled off the ribbon on her head. He really didn't expect to see this operation of making himself into a gift in reality. Holy Merry Christmas. At this time, Eudora raised her head slightly and snorted with a trembling voice. Website. https://mvip. VIP. Dake looked helpless, but he still said, "Okay, Merry Christmas." At the thought of Principal ARTI on the top of the cabinet behind him, Dake couldn't help but feel embarrassed. It was not easy for him to reverse his image as a young thug. If he didn't do something, wouldn't he repeat the same mistake? No, even if it's just acting, I must be reasonable with facts and let Eudora realize how unreasonable, wrong, and sick her behavior is. 11 or 12 years old is an important age to reshape one's values. She may have her current views because of her family, but I don't know her very well. Maybe I can find out something from Principal ARTI later. Dake thought for a while, then he changed his strategy and invited Eudora in. Eudora didn't know how she mustered up the courage to come over, but she became timid as soon as she entered the room. Dake waved to Eudora, and she followed timidly. Awesome. It was more and more like a thug coercing a pure girl. Dake's face was slightly dark. He pulled out a chair for her to sit down, took out a coat from the closet and put it on her. Then he poured a glass of apple juice and handed it over. Eudora took the apple juice, subconsciously tightened her coat, and took a sip. Dake then said, "Eudora Enway. Is that her name?" Eudora smiled inexplicably and nodded like a chick pecking rice. Yes, yes. Dake knocked on the table and decided to clarify things here. How did you fall in love with me? Eudora glanced away and whispered, "The first time." Dake was shocked. What do you mean? Eudora narrowed her eyes as if she was reminiscing. I saw him at the courtyard allocation ceremony. He looks just like the prince in the picture book. Dake. Did he become stupid from reading too many picture books? A blonde with blue eyes was a prince? That wasn't right either. Maybe it's because I'm too elegant? Dake rubbed his chin, and felt that this reason was reasonable. But Eudora didn't stop and said, "At first it was just a fantasy. You were like a prince coming out of a picture book. People couldn't help but start to pay attention to you. But because you always sit in the corner of the last row of the classroom, you can't see it clearly. I only feel that you are very serious and handsome. Until that day you helped Professor Lily substitute. Then the first interclass competition, the masquerade party, and the second interclass competition. You can always easily do things that we can't do. Every time I see you, I can't help but want to follow and get close to you. Dake instinctively felt that he couldn't let her continue, so he quickly interrupted. This may just be your one-sided impression. I mean, you haven't actually been in close contact with me. Distance makes beauty. People's eyes always have their own filters. I'm far from as good as you think. I can't be your son, so? Eudora suddenly said stubbornly. No, you are my son. I can see you glowing and heating up. It's so bright and blazing. She put down the cup and held her hands in her heart. She raised her head and looked at Dake for the first time after entering the room. Her eyes were firm, just like when she handed the letter to Dake. Dake noticed a trace of abnormality for a moment. There was obviously something in Eudora's eyes. He associated it with the fact that she was brought to school in advance because her magic power was out of control. Dake felt that he seemed to have understood something. This also made him realize that he had to treat Eudora with caution. Dake raised his hand and clasped her shoulder. When she was slightly flustered, he looked straight into her eyes and said seriously, "You're still only a first grade. Your time should be used more for studying and nothing else." Eudora became more and more flustered, but she still couldn't help but stubbornly say, But facing desire and taking action for it, you said it." Dake. It seemed like that was the case. After winning the intra-class competition, he did say such a sentence. But that was based on context, right? In short, she absolutely couldn't back down at this time. He immediately said, "I remember you wrote in the letter that you would work hard to make yourself better. I actually agree with this. Studying should be your main job. You're still too young now. We'll talk about the future later. Is that okay?" For some reason, Eudora's whole body suddenly softened again. She said softly, I will work hard." Dake breathed a sigh of relief, stood up straight, gathered his collar and said, "Then I'll send you back to the dormitory first." Eudora stood up reluctantly. When Dake took her out of the dormitory, he looked back at the top of the cupboard and saw the griffin's shining eyes. Tonight was the Christmas holiday, and 10 o'clock wasn't enough time for the students to sleep. There were still sounds coming from the common room, and one or two people would occasionally pass by in the corridor. Dake could only be glad that no one had witnessed Eudora's arrival. After Eudora, who was wearing a coat, was sent back to the dormitory, she clutched the coat in her hand at the door, looking like she didn't want to take it off. However, Dake knew that if he left this coat behind, something terrible would probably happen. So he decisively took the coat back and finally said, "Good night." Then he left without looking back. Eudora leaned against the door as if she had used up all her strength. Her entire body collapsed. She hugged her knees and felt the wind. She looked at Dake's back and gritted her teeth slightly. Dake, who returned to the dormitory, looked at the top of the cupboard immediately. "Principal, can you come down and talk?" The griffin hiding on the top of the cupboard chirped twice. It flew 2 rounds on the spot and transformed back into Principal Aerdi. She said in surprise, "Dimming, it seems that your charm is much greater than I thought." Ahem. Dake looked away and went straight to the point. "Principal, you can see that this is not what I expected. In short, is there anything you can say about Eudora's background?" Principal Aerdi moved the chair beside him over and sat down casually. "This is not a secret. Eudora is from a small noble family, but her bloodline can be traced back to the star-eyed demoness Shirley. She is of pure noble bloodline. Fortunately and unfortunately, the bloodline of the star-eyed demoness has awakened in her. Although she is not mature enough now, she can already see some trajectories that ordinary people can't see with the star-eyed demoness." After Dake heard this, he suddenly recalled the knowledge about the star-eyed demoness. That was the information he happened to see when he was looking for the symbols on the coat of arms of the Great Sin. The so-called star-eyed demoness was also known as Eyes of Stars. In the records, people with the star-eyed demoness could see through the trajectories of the stars and use it to spy on fate. Therefore, every messenger of the star-eyed demoness was a natural astrologer. Eudora obviously had an extremely high talent to become an astrologer. And the reason why she could see the sun was actually literal. She really saw the sun on Dark's body. That was the performance of pride. The fiery sun. Dake took a deep breath. When he first saw Eudora's letter, He never thought that the words in the letter would have such a deep meaning. Eudora could actually see his pride. That was so dense that it overflowed from his body with the naked eye. Until today, his pride still maintained an extremely high level. However, Eudora was obviously not mature enough. She could only see the sun in her eyes, but there was no moon. This was proof. However, the passage of time would help her gradually mature. One day, she would be able to see all the stars circulating on Dake's body. As for whether she could read the meaning behind those stars, it was another matter. I see. I roughly understand. Dake looked up and said to Principal Aertii, Eudora can see fate in her eyes, and my future is destined to be as bright as the sun. From now on, please call me Limitless Eyes. Fufu. Principal Aertii looked at Dake's serious bragging and couldn't help but laugh out loud. She then said, there are hundreds of explanations for a sign. This is like astrology. The same astrology result will show different destinies in the eyes of different astrologers. Since you are willing to believe so, then believe this. Dake crossed his fingers and smiled. I have always been curious. Since astrologers can peek at the trajectory of fate, why don't they do a divination every day? Principal Aertii, because they have to pay the price for it. The so-called astrologer was by no means a convenient profession. Generally speaking, divination would be divided into two parts. 1. Divination. 2. Interpretation. Astrologers were the kind of diviners who deduced the trajectory of fate by observing the movement of the stars. For them, divination was celestial scryer. After celestial scryer, they needed to interpret it. The same star chart trajectory, in the eyes of different astrologers, could even interpret completely opposite conclusions. Therefore, divination was not to determine events. The prophecy didn't directly tell you how much money you would get after you voted. Instead, it only told you that there was a high probability of triggering a lucky event after you voted. However, it was even more difficult. Even such a vague answer required a considerable price to be paid. And for each astrologer, the price they had to pay was different. Some people's eyesight would drop a little bit after each accurate divination, until they became completely blind. Some people would be mentally stimulated after each accurate divination, gradually going crazy. In short, there were many. In most cases, astrologers would not easily perform divination. Dake roughly understood the context. He chatted with Principal Aertii for half an hour, and finally, the principal could not stand it anymore. She looked like she needed to concentrate on her work, so she pretended to look at the clock on the wall and said, It's already so late? I almost forgot that I came here to deliver a gift. Dark, on the other hand, had already changed from his initial intense anticipation to his current indifference. As early as the day before Professor Claire left the academy, she had already told him. She had prepared a Christmas gift for him, and left it with Principal Aertii. However, there were too many things to think about during this time, so Dake accidentally forgot about it. It was not until Principal Aertii appeared that he suddenly remembered. However, who knew that the principal was so talkative? It was almost 11 o'clock. Okay. Dake could only silently complain in his heart. He saw Principal Aertii beckon with her hand, and another sphinx flew in with a seemingly cheap gift box in its mouth. Principal Aertii took the gift box from the sphinx's mouth and handed it back to Dake. Dake took the gift box and immediately found that it was very light, like an empty shell used to scare people. However, since it was a gift from Claire, it did not make sense for it to be empty. It's probably something very light, right? He thought for a moment and looked up at Principal Aertii. They looked at each other for a while. Dake spoke first. Principal, it is indeed very late. Principal Aertii. So open the gift as soon as possible. Dake. I just don't want to open it in front of you. Don't you understand? Aertii. I just want to see what Claire gave you, can't I? Their thoughts collided with each other through their eyes. In the end, Dake was slightly inferior, losing in terms of the thickness of his skin. The older the ginger, the spicier it was. Dake had no choice but to open the gift box in front of Principal Aertii. The small box was stuffed with soft stuffing. Dake reached in and felt around, only to find a Christmas card and a magic card. This is? Dake picked up the magic card and observed it carefully, only to find that it did not have a card face. This meant that the magic card was not a finished product. Dake then picked up the Christmas card, wanting to see what Claire left behind. However, Principal Aertii suddenly frowned. "Claire gave this to you?" She had obviously seen through the deception of this magic card. She did not support Claire's actions. Dake continued to look at the Christmas card. "Dear Dake, I think you must be very sad about my departure. After all, you can't sleep well without me at night. But it's okay, Auntie has prepared a big surprise for you. But you have to, 2-in-1 for 1,000 words updated yesterday." Chapter 202. But you have to remember that you can't use it in competitions. After all, the school doesn't allow us to give magic cards to students for free, even if it's a semi-finished product. Although it's not free. As Dake read out the 2 lines clearly, Aertii's frown finally relaxed. As an indispensable part of the school, the Shungmalian professors had far more power than what was on the surface. Deducting or adding points at will was equivalent to penalizing or printing money at will. Although they had their own set of rules that they had to abide by, they still had a lot of freedom. Therefore, it was very troublesome to choose a new professor. This time, Claire didn't show any intention of staying on, so the principal of Aertii had to find a new professor. If he couldn't find a suitable candidate, he could only shamelessly ask Claire again. Now it seemed that Claire was a good choice. Aertii was very satisfied. "Remember the website, MVIP, can't you?" Via's the smile on her face spread. Her body turned into light, and in the blink of an eye, she turned back into a griffin fairy. "Good night, Dimung." The principal's voice coming out of the little griffin's mouth was very strange. Dake changed his mind and said, "Good night, Principal." Then the 2 fairies flapped their wings and flew away slowly. Dark heaved a sigh of relief. The principle of Aertii's existence was a kind of pressure in itself, and he couldn't relax completely. But now he could study this gift from Claire more freely. From between the lines, he could roughly guess that the magic card that Claire gave him was more than 80% Zoo. This was a great surprise for Dake. After all, according to his current learning progress, even if he didn't mention the cost of the related materials, it would take him at least until after the summer break to learn how to make Zoo. His original plan had changed from making Zoo as soon as possible to trying to challenge it under Claire's guidance after the summer break. If he could get it in advance, not only would it be helpful for his learning and research, it would also be very helpful for the development of fetters. The premise was if it was really Zoo. Dake flipped the Christmas card to the back. The first line was, "Shui Ertii must think that this is Zoo. Don't make a fuss." At that moment, Dake's face turned blank. If it wasn't a zoo, what else could it be? He raised his head and couldn't help but look in the direction where the 2 little elves had left. He subconsciously closed the window and drew the curtains before continuing to look down. Put your thumb on the fingerprint on the bottom right corner of the Christmas card and infuse it with magic. Then you'll know how to make up for the incomplete magic card. When you succeed, you will know what it is. Of course, if he failed, then it's best if you don't know. Kit Kat sigh. JPG //omega/Dake frowned and looked up at the clock on the wall. It's already 11 o'clock, but I didn't use my brain much today. I feel like I'm in a good condition. Even if it was him, it was impossible for him to wait until the next morning to continue. He quickly found the fingerprint on the bottom right corner of the Christmas card. When he pressed his thumb on the fingerprint, there was an illusion of a fingerprint unlock. In short, he infused a trace of magic, and there was a feedback of information. He read the information and picked up a pen and paper on the table to record it quickly. The level of this semi-finished magic card was far higher than the semi-finished magic card that Dark had activated before, the night dress mask set. It was even more complicated than the Academy card. However, Claire had already completed almost all the steps of the refinement, and only left the 2 steps of infusing personal information, and the final refinement. This technique was exquisite and could be called the peak of perfection. Dake wrote down the 2 steps in detail, and finished the apple juice on the table in one gulp. As his mind gradually cleared up, he began to read and understand it repeatedly. He spent about half an hour on this. After that he used underworld magic to get rid of all distracting thoughts before he began the final refinement of the magic card. The first thing to do is to use magic to draw an array on the fingertip. This was an extremely brilliant branding method. The normal method was to use a magic pen to draw an array diagram on the magic card. However, this method was to draw the array directly on the fingertip, and then press the drawn magic array into the magic card as if pressing a seal. This required a high level of magic control. Dake had practice when he was learning how to refine Zoo, and was already very familiar with it. However, this was only the foundation. After successfully branding the magic array into the correct position of the magic card, it was the first crucial step. In other words, the injection of personal information. The higher the level of the magic card, the more obvious its personalization was. The sorcerer's thinking, magic, soul, and other factors would cause different changes in the magic card. Taking into account all the factors and making various adjustments to the magic card would result in only the sorcerer being able to use this magic card. At this level, there was no need to use thinking lock to ensure that the magic card would not be used by others. The so-called thinking lock was a soul and thought imprint. It was equivalent to a binding measure. It was often used to protect the magic card from being stolen and abused. The difference was that the thinking lock could be unlocked. On the other hand, the personalization of the magic card could not be unlocked and could only be used by the sorcerer himself. In the message left by Claire, there were more than 100 questions that needed to be answered. These questions required him to maintain the state of pressing the magic array into the magic card, and answer them in the form of instant answers to reduce the thinking time. All the questions were very simple and intuitive, and there were only differences in ideas. There was no right or wrong way to say it. For example, what does the paradise in your heart look like? As long as he could imagine the paradise in his mind, it was considered a pass. Even so, the whole process still consumed a lot of brain power. After Dake completed this step, he was already sweating profusely. He abruptly let go of his hand, and saw that on the surface of the magic card, there was a magic array shining with different radiance. Layer by layer, it kept expanding and contracting, and he knew that this half-finished magic card had been properly activated. However, he still needed to continue inputting magic power, and he had to use magic power to make subtle adjustments and optimizations to each magic array. Although he had learned all these things in Claire's after-school teaching, he did not have much experience in applying them. So everything had to be done carefully and carefully. However, Claire had obviously measured his ability before giving this semi-finished magic card as a gift. So, in the end, he did not make any major mistakes and completed the first step relatively perfectly. As for the magic card that received his thoughts, it also underwent a drastic change. In short, it gradually became his shape. This kind of semi-finished magic card was far more difficult than making the magic card itself. Moreover, the difficulty of making this magic card had reached the limit. The more Dake delved, the more shocked he was. He did not even think that he would have this ability before graduation. Claire was indeed the sage of beasts. The second step was the final refining. In this step, what he needed to do was not to add materials and inscribe the refining array. In fact, these steps had already been completed. According to Claire's message, this semi-finished magic card was set to operate automatically after activation. So in this step, he only needed to place the magic elven cards that he had personally refined around this semi-finished magic card on the magic arrays that would appear later. This semi-finished magic card would collect information from a large number of magic elven cards, and perfect the magic card itself to create the final product. Dake was already prepared. The magic from before had been completely integrated into the magic card, following the completion of the first step. This time, he used the magic pen to touch the surface of the card. Following the flow of magic power, a dozen magic arrays instantly popped out with the magic card as the center, appearing on the same plane and forming a circle. Dake first picked up a fantasy beast, Ibu, and placed it on the gray magic array that represented the attributes of birds and beasts. Then he picked up a trash slime, and placed it on the green magic array that represented the attributes of plants and grasses. Next was the kettle, with the attributes of insects and rocks. Diru beast, with the attributes of birds and beasts. Milk jar with the attributes of birds and beasts. Fairy Ibu, with the attributes of birds and beasts. Fantasy beast, ever-changing monster, with the attributes of elements. Harpy man, with the attributes of birds and beasts fighting/flying. Ball sea lion, with the attributes of birds and beasts. And finally, curse cage, little devil beast, with the attributes of darkness. There were a total of 10 magic elven cards. After placing these 10 magic elven cards on top of the 10 magic arrays, Dake used the magic pen to touch off the remaining magic arrays one by one before triggering the next step. The 10 magic arrays gradually rotated and began to revolve with the semi-finished magic card as the center. It actually formed a galaxy map. At this point in the experiment, Dake already had an unusually strong expectation for this semi-finished magic card. What kind of magic card was it that even the final supplement needed to collect such a huge amount of information? It seemed that it was somewhat similar to the method of refining the zoo. However, the zoo obviously did not need such a complicated procedure. Although the step of collecting information did not seem that difficult, the core of this magic card was how to process this information. What would it use this information for? However, it was useless to be anxious. At this point he could only wait. Time passed by little by little. The magic card was still operating on its own. It even made people wonder if it was stuck. Dake tried hard to hold down his restless hand and continued to wait. Until after midnight. It was a magic array, but it was suddenly retracted. 10 magic elven cards were scattered on the table. Is it over? However, just when Dake thought that the final refining was finally completed, a new magic array appeared on the surface of the magic card again. On the self-rotating magic array, wonders of mountains and seas appeared continuously, as well as some very modern amusement park facilities. For example, Ferris wheels, haunted houses, roller coasters, merry-go-rounds, bumper cars, torrents. However, in the end, the scenes of these facilities disappeared. The only thing left on the magic array was an empty fountain square. In the end, even the fountain was gone. The magic array shrank rapidly. The semi-finished magic card released the last strong light, and then returned to silence. The supplement was successful. After holding back for 2 minutes, Dake could not hide his excitement and picked it up. The surface of the magic card had been formed. It was a theme park with a huge Ferris wheel as the background and a merry-go-round at the front. The theme park was quiet and peaceful under the night sky. The half-extinguished neon lights provided the only light left in the theme park. The merry-go-round with colorful lights turned slowly to the silent music. The Ferris wheel in the background sank into the night sky. Only half of it was still lit up. Further in the background, there were rolling mountains. The moment magic was injected, a huge amount of information was fed back. Dake was a little confused for a moment. This was also a venue card. Moreover, it was a high-level card built on the basis of Zoo Paradise. The venue card that Claire named Paradise was a unique venue card that she created after so many years of traveling. However, Claire's own paradise was a nature park that included grasslands, forests, mountains, canyons, lakes, and many other elements. However, this paradise that Dake supplemented had the theme of an amusement park. What was more incredible was that this paradise had not been finalized yet. After it was refined, including the initial information collection, there were a total of 7 chances to input information and adjust it. That meant there were 6 chances left. This meant that this paradise was only at version 1.0. It could still be at version 2.0.3.0, and all the way to version 7.0. With Dake's current knowledge, he could not imagine how Claire did this. Is this the hero that people have been singing praises since the war? Dake had a deeper understanding of the power of the hero. He glanced at his bedroom and activated Paradise indoors. Generally, there were 2 ways to activate a venue card. One was to activate it completely, and the other was to activate it partially. The magic stored in the venue card by the Magus could only last for about 3 minutes. After that, the Magus had to inject it himself. Of course, the amount of magic consumed by the partial activation would be much lower. Of course, There were also venue cards like Claire's Zoo, that could form an energy cycle with the birds and beasts in the venue and had an energy-saving mechanism that could absorb external energy to replenish itself. The Paradise, in Dake's hands, was of this type. Once activated, it would last for more than half an hour. After activating, it would be easy to inject a certain amount of magic into it, even if it lasted for 24 hours. Just like Zoo, it could also allow the magic fairies that formed an energy cycle to survive for a long time. However, the magic fairies that could form an energy cycle with Paradise could only be the 10 that had already been recorded. As Dake activated Paradise, the light emitted from the magic card illuminated the entire bedroom. A merry-go-round appeared on the empty space beside the bed. Meow meow meow. Ing ing ing. Moo. 2-in-1 4150 words. Yesterday's copy. Chapter 203. In order not to destroy the bedroom, Dake chose the smallest and simplest merry-go-round. However, the sudden appearance of the merry-go-round still made the three little guys cry out in surprise. The most curious one, Kitty Grass, was the first to approach and carefully touched the base of the merry-go-round with its meatball. Then Kitty Grass and Milkweed also came over. Dake picked up Kitty Grass and placed it on the back of one of the white horses. Then he used magic to start the merry-go-round. The merry-go-round started to turn little by little. The wind chimes hanging on the umbrella made a crisp and pleasant sound as they turned. Meow meow meow. However, Kitty Grass was shocked by the sudden movement of the merry-go-round. It grabbed the back of the horse and trembled. Dake could not help but smile. He bent down and wanted to pick up Kitty Grass as well. Chirp. Kitty Grass sprang up and ran away with the small flower pot in tow. 1 second to remember. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP Milkweed was still staring blankly. However, Dake only smiled for a while. Then he picked up Kitty Grass from the merry-go-round. Then he carefully observed the merry-go-round. The field card's ability to create things out of thin air was really amazing. Every time he saw it, he would be shocked. The merry-go-round in front of him seemed to be built with real materials. If a fire was put on it, it might even ignite. However, it was essentially fictional. I remember Claire once said that the field card used the technology of true projection. In the super ancient era, it could almost be called the power of God. Even among the demons who studied magic in the past, only the extremely high-ranking demons had the opportunity to master it. However, in today's era, a sorcerer can use this ability by refining a field card. It can be called a miracle. However, when miracles become rare and common, they are not worthy of being called miracles. Dake grabbed the ear of a merry-go-round and suddenly twisted it hard. Crack. That ear was forcefully twisted off. The cut surface of the broken ear could be seen to be made of wood. However, the ear that was twisted off directly turned into specks of light. That was the manifestation of the collapse of magic. So, after the field card's field is destroyed, it will be converted into mana and dissipate? Dake thought for a moment, then turned around and walked to the experiment table, collecting all 10 magic elven cards. Building an energy cycle so that the magic elf could survive in Paradise for a long time was just one of Paradise's basic functions. As a high-level venue card, Paradise naturally had an additional venue effect. Dake took out Illusory Beast, Ibu from the 10 magic elf cards, and immediately began to cast Normal Summon. Inside Paradise, he could clearly feel the close connection between Illusory Beast, Ibu, and the place. This made the normal summoning spell as smooth as silk. It was only 2 seconds. Ibu-chan jumped out with a plop. On the surface of the card, the 3 values of magic power, defense, and attack were all plus 100 at the same time. The effect of version 1.0 Paradise was just that simple. For each additional magic guide elf belonging to Paradise, magic attack and defense plus 100 magic guide elf of Paradise, summon time -1s. Every second counted in a magic guide duel. There was no need to explain what -1s meant. It was a pity that this magic guide card could not be used in the Academy's duel competition for the time being. However, Zoo also had the effect of summon time -1s. Animal Kingdom had the effect of summon time -1s and bird and beast species -1. Because summon time equaled summon cooldown, these two venue cards of the Zoo series, which were the core of the series, could be said to be terrifying. As long as Animal Kingdom was set up, Claire could summon 3 4-star second-tier Magic Guide Elves within 10 seconds. Moreover, her spiritual bond with the Magic Guide Elves could further shorten the summoning time. At the limit, her normal summoning spell casting time was less than 1 second, and the cooldown time was also less than 1 second. On the battlefield, she could fill up nearly 24-star Magic Guide Elves in 1 round. As one of the most talented humans in terms of magic power, although her magic power could not be compared to the high-sequence demons, it was enough for her to use this kind of beast wave tactic. Once Animal Kingdom was cast, she did not have to worry about the duration of the Magic Guide Elves on the battlefield. Coupled with other types of Magic Guide cards, it was simply a nightmare on the battlefield. Sage of the Beasts enjoyed a great reputation among humans. However, among the demons, she was only known as the Abominable Demon. Of course, at the moment when the demons were wiped out, no one called her by her evil name. After Dake carried little Ibu and studied it carefully, he summoned all the remaining Magic Guide Elves. It took about a minute to summon a 4-star Magic Guide Elven card with a normal summoning spell. Although it was a little slow, there was no need to sacrifice. As the 10 Magic Guide Elves appeared one by one, the originally spacious bedroom became slightly crowded. Fortunately, all his Magic Guide Elves were petite enough. As soon as Little Fiend came out, it started to get angry. However, as more and more Magic Guide Elves were summoned, it gradually realized that something was wrong. It hurriedly went into the wardrobe and took out its beloved scarf to wrap around it. Although it was wrapped in a crooked manner, it was a symbol of power. As the Magic Guide Elven with the highest power in this bedroom, Little Fiend stood on the bird stand and looked down at the world. The Diru Beast, which was refined with the fruit of pride, and Angel's Feather, as the core, chose the top of the wardrobe. It sat on the edge of the top of the wardrobe with its arms crossed and legs crossed. Its eyes were arrogant and condescending. However, when it saw the Fairy Ibu and Big Milk Can, which were refined with the fruit of bliss, as the core material, shamelessly playing with Dake, the corner of the Diru Beast's eyes kept twitching. On the other side, Trash Slime and Fantasy Beast, Changeable Monster, had already become relatives. Kettle wanted to join in, but it was despised because of its carapace. Wrestling Hawkman's eyes were sharp. It seemed to be looking for sandbags and wooden dummies. Chio Sea Lion came to the front of the merry-go-round curiously and blew bubbles at it. After the Magic Guide Elves were summoned, they clearly felt a different feeling from before. They found that their magic power loss had become extremely slow. There was even magic power flowing into their bodies through the circulation network to replenish the lost magic power. They didn't have to worry about magic power exhaustion at all. As Magic Guide Elves, this was the first time they had such a feeling. This gave them, who had an intelligence level of more than 3.0, except for Trash Slime, a very real sense of security. Chapter 204. Looking at the room full of Magic Guide fairies, Dake's expression couldn't help but soften. Perhaps it was because he had unlocked his intelligence, but he couldn't treat his Magic Guide fairies as tools. Now that he had paradise, he could finally release them temporarily. No matter if it was Ibu, Fairy Ibu, or the Dilu Beast, they were all so furry that he couldn't help but want to suck them. He gently stroked Ibu's little head, feeling the temperature of Fairy Ibu and the milk jug's body. After a while, he took out the Magic Guide fairy card to check. Paradise's effect was stunning. After the 10 Magic Guide fairies were all summoned, each Magic Guide fairy's magic attack and defense increased by a full 1,000 points. This meant that even the weakest Ibu, the Trash Slime, and the 100 Change Monster all had an average of 1,100 points. It didn't seem like a high number, but for Ibu, who had the killing move, Imitation, and the 100 Change Monster, who had the killing move, Transform, it was a terrifying increase. In terms of numbers, the Dilu Beast and Ho-Hu had the biggest increase. The Dilu Beast's magic attack and defense had reached 3,000, 3,400, and 2,400 points respectively. The first website was https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP and Hoho's defense had reached 3,300 points, and 3,500 points was the peak of a 7-star magic guide fairy in the 3rd tier. This meant that the Dilu Beast's maximum strength in Paradise had reached the level of a 7-star magic guide fairy. And this was only Paradise version 1.0. Dake realized that he had received the biggest gift since Christmas. Clap, clap, clap. Dake clapped his hands and gathered all the magic guide fairies to sit in a row. Then he poured a cup of juice for each of them. Today is Christmas. He pointed out the topic first. It's also the day that Paradise is born. Let's celebrate. Cheers. As all the magic guide fairies drank, Dake explained the rules of Paradise in detail. In the future, if it wasn't necessary, he would do his best to put Paradise in the dormitory. The magic guide fairies could choose to live in the dormitory according to their own wishes. Occasionally, they could wander around like the little demons. However, they had to pay attention to returning to Paradise to replenish their mana before their mana ran out. Otherwise, they would return to the magic card due to exhaustion. When he said this, Big Milk Jug patted his chest proudly and shouted, "Moo Big Milk Jug." When all the magic guiding fairies looked over, it raised its hooves and rubbed them together, creating a bottle of milk. It mooed a few times. It meant, as long as you drink a mouthful of the milk I make, you can recover half of your magic power. In other words, the travel time would be increased by half. Although the milk made from the milk jug couldn't last for a long time, it could still last until the end of the trip. This was undoubtedly good news for the magic guide fairies. Under normal circumstances, after the magic elf was summoned, it would last for 3 to 5 minutes before it began to consume its own magic power. The magic power consumption of a 1-star magic elf was 1 point/second. The magic power consumption rate of a 2-star magic elf was 2 points per second. The mana consumption rate of a 3-star magic elf was 3 points per second. And so on. For example, Big Milk Jug originally had 2,000 points of magic power, and would not consume magic power for about 3 to 5 minutes. After that, it would start to consume magic power at 4 points per second, and could last for an additional 500 seconds, which added up to about 10 minutes. If it drank a bottle of milk that it had brought along beforehand, it could last for an additional 250 seconds outside. Of course, this amount of time was not considered long, but as soon as Big Milk Jug's cooldown was up, it could use its ultimate skill, Drink Milk, to create another bottle of milk. It should be the one that could last the longest among the 10 magic guiding fairies present. Unfortunately, milk could only last for about 10 minutes and could not be saved. Wait, I wonder if there are any spells or items that can freeze magic. Dake had a flash of inspiration and suddenly had an idea. Milk also belonged to the category of magic. If it could be frozen, wouldn't it be preserved for a long time? At that time, the magic guiding fairies at home would each carry a small backpack and fill it with milk every time they went out. Oh, it was too cute. Dake touched the corner of his mouth, thinking that he still had to enter the secret passage to dig for treasures tomorrow. He let the magic guiding fairies move freely, while he went to wash up first. But as soon as he changed into pajamas and walked out, he was stopped by the little fiend. "What's wrong?" Dake exhaled, his eyes carrying the sleepiness of a bath. The little fiend puffed up its cheeks and reminded, "Remove the spell, remove the spell." Oh, Dake yawned, picked up the spell cage, and released it. Then he crawled into bed and fell asleep in 2 seconds. At that moment, the entire bedroom suddenly became quiet. The magic guiding light in the bedroom was dimly lit, and the 10 magic guiding fairies, including the little fiend, were all quietly looking at each other. Then he started to move silently. Magic guiding fairies were the same as familiars. In theory, as long as they had magic power, they did not need to eat or sleep. They had just been summoned from the magic guiding card, and were now full of energy. But the only entertainment in the bedroom, the merry-go-round, had already been turned off, and the wind chimes were too loud and would disturb their master's sleep. Fairy Ibu and the milk jug, who always wanted to stick to their master's side, could only suppress their impulses and find the fox grass and milk cow grass with a familiar smell. But just as they became intimate with the two mothers, They discovered that the coffee-colored winged scarf very skillfully climbed onto their master's bed. Even more enviable was that it actually crawled into their master's bed. Unforgivable. The milk jug was still relatively calm. Fairy Ebu, on the other hand, drilled herself between the little fiend and Dark with a swoosh. Her rear leg kicked out like lightning, and with a bang kicked the little fiend out of the bed. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The little fiend bared its fangs and brandished its claws, but it did not dare to curse loudly. Fairy Ibu, on the other hand, narrowed its eyes and comfortably moved to its master's side. Master's scent fragrant. Under the light, a large syringe with a shark's head gradually appeared in the little fiend's claws. Its eyes glowed, and it carefully flew over, fiercely stabbing at Fairy Ibu's butt. But in the next moment, its claws were tightly bound by a pink ribbon, and then the ribbon's antennae exerted force and lifted it upside down. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The little fiend hanging upside down in the air immediately revealed an extremely sorrowful expression, but facing Fairy Ibu, whose strength far exceeded its own, it could only silently roar. Helpless fury. The little fiend was miserable. Big Milk can witness the entire process of the incident, and was also moved by it. But just as it was eyeing the other side of its master's bed, it discovered that the white cat with its chin up had already occupied the bed. Moo. Moo. Chapter 205. Clang. Just as the few 4-star magic guide sprites were fighting openly and secretly, a soft sound suddenly came from the bathroom. Then there was the sound of water splashing. Fufu. Chio Sea Lion danced under the shower. Then, it excitedly turned on the tap of the fish tank. When the fish tank was filled with water, it flicked its tail and plunged into the fish tank with a water splash, splashing countless water. Obviously, Chio Sea Lion had found its own paradise in this bedroom. And on the other side, the multiform monster had already moved to the balcony with the garbage slime. They lay on the balcony like two pools of mucus, bathing in the moonlight while communicating with their tentacles. Even though they actually did not speak the same language, it felt very compatible. Remember the URL. MVIP, can't you? VIP. But the quiet atmosphere did not last long. The Hawkman Wrestling, who seemed to be wearing a wrestling mask, came to the balcony. It touched its chin with the claws at the tip of its wings and looked at the sky outside the balcony. After a long while, the Hawkman Wrestling jumped lightly to the balcony window. It opened the lock of the protective window. As the cold wind poured in, it actually exerted force and flew into the night sky. The moonlight scattered and soared into the sky. Gotcha! The multiform monster's body slowly elongated and turned into a distorted human figure. Then, it reached out and closed the protective window and locked it again. Hurry, hurry. It's so cold. What if my baby freezes? Then it turned back to its original form and stuck together with the garbage slime. In the room, at some point, Earbook squeezed into Kitty Grass's sleeping basket and curled up with Kitty Grass. It was already squinting its eyes. Only Kettle was crawling back and forth in the bedroom. It looked like it was taking a walk. After the big milk can's anger subsided, it thought that if it hit too hard, it might wake its master up, so it suppressed its emotions. It turned around and teased the milky grass. Seeing that it was a little sleepy, it carried it back to the small nest on the balcony. Then the big milk can, who had returned to the room, suddenly had an idea and aimed at the empty spot on the big bed. Thus, she carefully crawled under the quilt at the end of the bed. The little fiendish magical beast that had been forced back to the bird perch stared at the 3 4-star magical guiding fairies that occupied the 3 beds with a gloomy gaze, muttering things like, "I'll kill you sooner or later." As the movements in the bedroom became more and more subtle, the magic lamp automatically extinguished, and there was no more light in the bedroom. The next morning, the morning light shone into the room. Dake woke up in a daze, but he suddenly felt an unusual softness on both sides of his body. He wasn't used to this feeling. Usually, even if the cat grass and other small magical beasts occasionally crawled over, he didn't feel much because they were too small. But now, his thoughts spun in his mind for a few seconds before he struggled to open his eyelids. Finally, he found the source of the abnormality. 2 magical guiding fairies, who were sleeping soundly, were tightly pressed against his sides. Fairy Ibu's ribbon was even wrapped around his right arm. Unknowingly, the Dilu beast had curled up and was hugging his left arm like an ordinary cat, its cheek pressed tightly against his arm. Dake blinked, not daring to act rashly. The feeling of being surrounded by furry creatures made his body and mind very happy. Perhaps this was the saying, "A day's worth is in the morning." Perhaps feeling Dake's unintentional movements, Fairy Ibu and the Dilu beast woke up after about 3 minutes. Me Heartsuit, Fairy Ibu slowly burrowed into his master's embrace. The Dilu beast quietly let go of its master's meatball and got off the bed as if nothing had happened. The big milk pot sleeping at the end of the bed opened its eyes and then half sat up, half of the bedding falling off. Dake looked around and saw that the magical guiding fairies were gradually waking up. He suddenly realized what was missing in the dormitory. The bed and the bedding couldn't be missing. In addition, he had to get a cat tree or something to add a bit of space. He had to get 1 or 2 beginners teaching materials for people who were willing to learn. The space in the bedroom was limited and couldn't provide them with a place to stretch their muscles and bones. But if they could learn how to read, they could pass the time by reading. Afterwards, he carried Fairy Ibu off the bed and carefully looked around to confirm that 1 out of 10 was missing. "Where's the Hawkman?" With a trace of doubt, Dake pulled out the Hawkman's magical guiding card and found that it was curled up in the card, sulking. Last night, after flying freely under the night sky for a few minutes, it hurriedly flew back before its magical power was exhausted. In the end, it was met with a closed door. The tightly locked protective window isolated it from the paradise, causing it to disappear. After listening to the Hawkman's narration of the whole process, Dake began to ask who locked the protective window. The variegated monster trembled and raised its tentacles. Dake praised it. The Hawkman. Around 9 o'clock, Dake healed the insect tree and fed the 3 cat plants before leaving the dormitory with a big bag. After that, Deanna and Luosi came to visit but missed. The paradise had only been open for 1 night before the magical guiding fairies returned to the card to sleep. Dake only summoned the little fiendish magical beast to accompany him. This was obviously an extremely normal thing, but the little fiendish magical beast suddenly felt that it was cherished. It touched the corner of its eyes with some tears and rubbed its chin against the scarf. It wanted to cry. On the first day after Christmas, Dake Dimming finally began the big adventure of this short holiday. He had made perfect preparations and brought all the tools that he could bring with him. The estimated time was 72 hours, and the goal was to rush back before dawn the day after tomorrow. Today, not only did the students put up all kinds of street signs in the secret passage, they also drew a map of the outer circle of the passage. This could be bought anywhere in Traveler Street. However, due to the variability of the secret passage, he couldn't completely trust the map. In short, he looked at the map as he explored. With the little fiendish magical beast as the vanguard, the initial progress was very smooth. The treasure map left behind by Yvette had 17 markers, including the location of the treasure. The first marker was the chess piece, which was the statue of the Grand Magus. The second marker was the elephant, which was the elephant head lampstand mixed in with the monotonous torches. As for the third marker, more than an hour later, Dake looked down at the panda pattern on the treasure map, and then looked up at the 2 giant bear statues guarding the entrance of the passage. He finally confirmed that these 2 giant bear statues, one black and one white, should be the third marker he was looking for. Asterisk, a type of plant. At the same time, White and Luo Boat had also entered the secret room. There were other people beside them. Chapter 206. Most humans were creatures with a short fuse. Under the pressure of the professor's homework and the constraints of the big project at the end of the semester, the craze for the secret passage had long since died down. In addition, it was the morning after Christmas. If there wasn't a specific purpose, no one would be bored enough to come to the secret passage for a morning exercise. Luo Boat was at the back of the group. He only found out last night that there would be other people traveling with him today. In order to decipher the secret of the treasure, White had specially invited an upperclassman and upperclasswoman. Luo Boat had wondered where White had met the upperclassman, but the latter had always used confidentiality as an excuse. It wasn't until this morning that he saw the so-called upperclassman at the entrance of the secret passage. His face fell on the spot. Luo Boat never imagined that the upperclassman White had mentioned was actually C. Keat from the Maritime Church and another girl. It was simply inconceivable. White actually wanted to be the mediator between him and C. Keat. Did he know what kind of grief and pain he had suffered? Remember this. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP fine. He seemed to know a little bit. But it was different. Luo Boat firmly believed that his suffering was far worse than White's. Even though the two of them had undergone the same transformation technique, their circumstances were completely different. If Dake hadn't dealt with it properly, Luo Boat would have been socially dead. In the middle of the night, whenever he thought of that possibility, Robert would break out in a cold sweat. But now his best friend wanted him to reconcile with his most hated enemy? Impossible. Don't use brainwashing as an excuse. Luo Boat won't fall for that. Luo Boat walked at the back of the group, stepping on C. Keat's shadow with a gloomy face. If it weren't for the fact that he was worried about White, he would have been watching the magic chess event on Traveler's Street excitedly. However, he had been reflecting on himself recently, and realized that he had indeed been a hindrance to White in many ways. Therefore, whenever he made such decisions, he would feel guilty and give in to White a little. But could C. Keat really solve the puzzle left behind by Brute the Brave? It was said that he wasn't an outstanding person in the aristocratic academy. In that case, could he only rely on another senior? Betty Murray. That seemed to be the name. It was said that she was a senior from the 4th-year School of Magic, and was in the same year as the librarian, Panduola. Luo Boat's gaze shifted. 4th-year students were already considered the backbone of the academy, so it was possible for them to solve the puzzle. But for Victor, her status as a 4th-year student in the School of Magical Devices might be a plus point. They seemed to be having a pleasant chat. Betty was walking side by side with White. After taking off her eel skin, she had long, silky brown hair. Although her figure was slightly flat, her facial features were good, and her pair of long legs were particularly eye-catching. After the Maritime Order exposed each other's identities in the infirmary, they still wore leather at every gathering, but it was more of a habit and a sense of ritual. Compared to C. Keat, whose face was full of pockmarks, she was more like an excellent student. In fact, this was the case. Her ex-boyfriend, Antonio, was one of the most outstanding boys in the 4th-year School of Magic. If they didn't have the same level of knowledge, she wouldn't have become lovers with him. However, men were indeed superficial creatures. In the end, Antonio chose her best friend Jenny, who was nothing but a brainless trash with big breasts. Betty had been depressed about this for a long time, which was why she was persuaded by Mr. Haixing. But after the Moon God incident, she gradually got over it. Because Antonio and Jenny were breaking up. The reason was that they weren't chosen as sacrifices by the Moon God. That was so funny. Betty laughed all day when she learned about this. As for why she was now hanging out with White, that would have to be traced back to the night of the Christmas ball. That night, the Order had a second gathering after the Christmas ball, both to improve their relationship and to vent their stress. Well, the latter was the main reason. After all, they all joined the Order because of different degrees of social problems. The Christmas ball might be an event that brought smiles to most students, but in the eyes of the Order members, it could only bring sadness. They had no friends, no lovers, and even if their psychological state was better than before, they were still isolated people outside of the group. Even the relationship between the Order members was limited to huddling together for warmth and pouring out their grievances. They weren't considered friends. This was particularly sad. But in every school, there were more or less such people. In short, at the second gathering that night, C. Keat, whose code name was Squid, suddenly brought a newcomer, which made the Order members feel very surprised and repulsed. But when Scarda took off the newcomer's headgear, the Order members were so shocked that they were speechless. Because the newcomer turned out to be one of the victims of the Moon God incident, the hero's son, White Gouda. C. Keat and White clearly had a grudge against each other, so why did she suddenly become White's guide? The Order members were shocked and confused. It wasn't until C. Keat told them about her past and White's encounter that the Order members came to a realization and accepted the hero's son who also suffered a tragic fate. The same Christmas Eve. The same Christmas ball. The same encounter. Last year on this day, Seekit was completely defeated by the accumulated depression in her heart, because the girl she had always had a crush on responded to the invitation of a senior, and became someone else's dance partner at the romantic and gorgeous ball. She accepted Mr. Haishing's persuasion, and became the current squid. He paid a little attention to Dake at this year's Christmas ball, and noticed that White was very similar to himself. The two resonated with each other's experiences, and finally buried the hatchet. They even faintly felt that they were each other's confidants. But unlike Seekit, White's relationship wasn't over yet, so he still had a theoretical chance. Seekit knew that he wanted to know more about Panduola, so she agreed to introduce him to Betty, senior Panduola's classmate. The order members didn't reject accepting someone who had a similar experience as everyone else. Moreover, the identity of the hero's son was like a flag that could legitimize the church that had been hidden all this time. White Gouda successfully replaced Mr. Haishing and became the 16th member of the order. That night, not only did Werther tell her about his crush on Senior Pandora, he also told her about the pressure and misfortune he had suffered since school started. He was so emotional that he almost burst into tears. In this sorrowful atmosphere, the order members could empathize with him. Seekit was even willing to support him. In the midst of his narration, White inadvertently mentioned the hero's treasure. Betty showed great interest in it, which led to today's trip. Chapter 207. White's speed was faster than Dake's because she already had the experience of going back and forth. However, their goals were different, so their routes were different as well. Dake didn't know that White and the others had also entered the secret passage. He habitually took out his notebook and started sketching. Soon, the outlines of two giant bear statues appeared on the notebook. It was a black bear with a giant axe and a white bear with a giant sword. Both bears were clad in armor like knights, looking mighty and majestic. After 2 minutes, Dake finished sketching. He put the notebook back into his bag, and followed the treasure map's guidance into the passage guarded by the two giant bears. In an instant, the ground shook slightly. The sound of something shattering could be heard in his ears. The website was https://m. VIP can't you? VIP watch out. The little fiendish magical beast in the air suddenly let out a shriek. Dake instinctively took 2 steps back. There was a slight delay of 2 seconds. Rock fragments flew everywhere as the giant axe and giant sword slashed down from both sides. They swept past his bangs and landed heavily on the ground. Dake took 2 more steps back in a panic, and saw the 2 giant weapons crossing each other, sealing the entrance of the passage. Fine cracks appeared on the black and white bears' bodies, especially the stone shells on their joints, revealing the thick and long fur underneath. Dake's expression changed. Could it be the most common boss in the game? He originally thought that after the students retreated, there wouldn't be any more monsters like the Minotaur in the secret passage. However, it seemed that he was too optimistic. It's time for battle. Dake's tone couldn't help but become more excited. He had to admit that after experiencing the second in-class competition, his desire for battle had deepened. The little devil beast in the air sensed its master's will, and immediately flew down. Dake put his finger into his bag and gathered magic at the tip of his finger. With a slight stroke on the side of the magic card, he selected the Bliss 3 from a large number of magic cards. Then as he continued to retreat, he hooked his index finger and middle finger, and the Extreme Happiness 3 was caught between his hands. Swipe card evolve. The Bliss 3 card released a strong pink light that intersected with the flames on both sides of the passage. The little devil beast took the initiative to welcome the light of bliss, and the skull pattern on its forehead was immediately replaced by the bliss emblem. The moment the emblem took shape, all the pink light suddenly contracted and gathered towards the emblem. The little devil beast and the strong light assimilated, and its body gradually elongated, revealing the form of a cat girl. When the strong light receded, a graceful black cat stretched out its body and appeared. It was the Heidi beast. The new Bliss 3 evolved from the new Bliss 3. Although it had a flirtatious side, it also had a rational side. It stood in front of Dark and stared solemnly at the two giant bear statues. Then, it suddenly leaped up and chose to take the initiative to attack. Cat fist. Although the Heidi was a variant of the Heidi, the cat claw gloves on its hands copied the data of the golden sword lion's claws, and it could tear through almost everything. Dake only saw a flash of black light, and the white bear statue on the right had its stomach torn open. The stone shell that wasn't completely shattered instantly, but there was no blood coming out from the 3 deep scratches. It was obvious that the white bear inside the stone shell wasn't made of flesh and blood. After being provoked by the Heidi, the white bear suddenly turned its shoulder axis and slashed with its giant sword. The sword was powerful and as fast as lightning. Although the Heidi's attack was as high as 1900, its defense was only 900. If it was hit by the sword, it would definitely be injured. But it was very good at strategy, and it left as soon as it touched the sword. The powerful sword cut through the air and made a loud noise on the ground. The Heidi's feet kicked, and the cat turned into a shadow. In an instant, it jumped over the giant sword and raised its claws to aim at the white bear's face. Roar! Almost in an instant, the black bear on the left also moved. It didn't do anything, but raised its giant axe and slashed at the white bear's stomach. The giant axe didn't open, but it was thick and heavy. The Heidi's body was in the air, and it couldn't dodge in time. It was sent flying. Its magic power value had already plummeted to a degree visible to the naked eye. However, at this moment, Dark had completely calmed down. Based on the Heidi's injuries, its attack power is in the 4-star range. There are 2 of them and they mainly fight in close combat. They haven't shown any skills yet. Heidi's beast, can one person do it? Of course. The Heidi's beast walked back to Dake's side, took the energy potion from Dake's hand, and swallowed it. Magic plus 200. After recovering a bit, its eyes were even sharper. If it couldn't even deal with 2 stupid bears, how could it compete with Fairy Evie and the Heidi's beast? It held its breath and calmed down. Its feet were spread apart, and its hands were in a standard posture, ready to welcome the storm-like battle. Boom! The 2 giant bears finally shattered the stone shells on their bodies. They stepped out at the same time, and walked down from the base of the stone statue. Then one bear raised its stone axe, and the other bear raised its stone sword. With a roar, they charged forward. Guarding the passageway and eliminating intruders had been their unchanging duty since ancient times. Within their duty, there was no room for discussion. But perhaps the passage of time had eroded their bodies, or perhaps the long life of a stone statue had caused them to be gradually assimilated. Other than the speed at which they swung their weapons, their movements were clearly stiff. The Heidi's beast took a deep breath and gradually gathered power like a master. When the 2 weapons from the left and right suddenly came crashing down, it lowered its body and slid forward in an instant, perfectly dodging the attacks of the 2 weapons. Then it gently jumped and soared into the air. Using the white bear's body as a stepping stone, it jumped onto the black bear's head. Then it used a cat fist, and cleanly smashed the top of its head, along with the black bear's collapse. The Heidi's beast jumped back and stretched its body in the air. It was as soft as a sea cucumber as it landed on the white bear's head in an unimaginable posture. The white bear held its giant sword and didn't know how to throw it away to grab it. It only swung its sword back and ruthlessly cut off a layer of its own head. It was so stupid that it made people laugh. The Heidi's beast lightly jumped and dodged the giant sword. Then it finished it off with a final strike. In just a few short rounds, it was like a butterfly dancing among flowers, showing extreme dexterity, breaking the top of the head and crushing the core. The black bear and the white bear, as a mimicry of living creatures, stopped functioning. The Heidi's beast easily defeated the enemy. Chapter 208. So they're just golems? Dake walked forward and bent down to check the bodies of the 2 giant bears. He wanted to see if there were any extra rewards. However, as soon as his fingertips touched it, the giant bear suddenly disintegrated into scattered starlight. Even the crushed core in the palm of the black Dirk Road beast dissipated into the light. It was as if they had never appeared before. However, the bases of the stone statues on both sides of the passage, as well as the surrounding stone fragments, were still there. Could it be that they're not golems? Dake picked up a bit of stone powder and observed carefully. He was puzzled. Originally, when he followed the instructions on the treasure map to find this place, he felt that something was wrong. Now that he suddenly remembered, he gradually realized where the problem was. Then he quickly took out the map that he bought from Traveler's Street to check. He found that although the map included the area under his feet, it didn't mark the two giant bear statues. They were so eye-catching and were the most suitable markers on the map, but there was no trace of them. He remembered the URL. VIP can't you? 6-inch. Does this mean that before I came here, these two stone statues didn't exist? That's not right. This is the third marker on the treasure map. It should have been here all along. Unless, it's bound to the treasure map. Because I have the treasure map, that's why it appeared. That does make sense. Dake thought carefully for a while. He felt that the next treasure hunt wouldn't be peaceful. Then, it wouldn't be safe to have a little devil beast with him. He thought for a while and picked out a 4-star magic elf card from his card pack. He used the usual summoning spell to summon it. After more than a minute, a white cat with a holy ring on its tail leaped out of the magic card. The Dirk Road Beast pursed its lips and glanced at the little devil beast that evolved into the Black Dirk Road Beast. Its amber eyes showed a trace of unconcealable disgust. There was a natural repulsion between creatures with holy coefficients and creatures with dark coefficients. Moreover, the Dirk Road Beast and the Black Dirk Road Beast were like two sides of the same coin. If it didn't know that it was the evolved form of the little devil beast, the Dirk Road Beast would have sent it to heaven with a cat fist. Meow. The Heidi Road Beast ignored the Dilu Beast's hostility. It put on its scarf again, and quietly hugged the Dake's arm before the duration of its evolution ended. Dake stroked its head and took a deep breath. Keep going. A few minutes later, the Heidi Road Beast returned to its little demon form and resumed the role of a scout. As for the Diru beasts, they had already begun to consume their own mana to maintain their existence. Although the use of magic was prohibited in the duel, a magus could continuously inject magic into a magic card, or make direct contact with a magic fairy to replenish the magic of the magic fairy. However, unlike charging cards like the energy potion, the mana replenishment of the magic fairy by a magister was a continuous and slow process, and it couldn't instantly replenish a few hundred points of mana. So as long as he had the Diru Beast magic card, Dake could continuously replenish the mana of the Diru Beast. And with his current extraordinary mana recovery speed, it was completely enough to make up for the mana consumption of a 4-star magic elf. However, as the mana replenishment continued, the Diru Beast's cheeks turned slightly red. The constant flow of warmth into its heart made its body slightly warm. Dake didn't notice the slight abnormality of the Diru Beast. He repeatedly compared the treasure map and the map, constantly adjusting the route forward. Finally, when it was close to noon, he found the fourth marker. It was a wall made up of 16x16-1 plates. The wall itself was very eye-catching. However, the picture drawn on the treasure map was a cat with its mouth wide open. If he didn't find the picture of a cat's paw on the wall, Dake wouldn't be able to confirm that the wall was the fourth marker. There were a total of 255 plates on the wall, and each plate could be moved. Looking at the picture on the treasure map, Dake quickly understood that this should be a puzzle level. The goal was to put the 255 plates into the picture of a cat. Although this looked like a children's puzzle game, 255 plates was really a lot. Moreover, the plates at the top of the wall could only be moved by the little evil magical beasts. What was even scarier was that the marker on the treasure map was clearly a cute picture, but the mural on the wall was a surreal one. In other words, the two pictures were completely different. Dake first tried to move the plates in the frame to put the picture together, but he quickly found that the difficulty of this puzzle was simply too high. It couldn't be completed in a short time. Helpless, he began to try to remove the puzzle plates from the wall. He didn't expect to succeed. Those plates were attracted to the wall like magnets. As long as he pulled hard, he could remove them entirely. Dake held the plates and couldn't help but think about how it was like when he played with the Rubik's Cube. Because he couldn't turn it back, he had to remove the Rubik's Cube and reassemble it. This way, the difficulty of the puzzle suddenly decreased by a large level. Dake simply removed all the puzzle pieces, and then assembled them according to the picture in his mind. After about 2 hours, he finally completed the assembly process. A mural of a lion roaring in the forest gradually appeared on the wall. You painted a lion as a cat? You're really something, Yvette. Dake looked at the lion mural with a slightly dark expression. If he hadn't found a way to cheat, he would have been completely defeated here today. Crack! A strange sound suddenly came from the wall. Dake's expression changed slightly. He saw a white light suddenly shining between the gaps of the puzzle plates. The next moment, the lion's roar pierced through his eardrums. The wall suddenly floated. A strong wind blew. A fishy smell accompanied by the strong wind blew in his face. Dake's gaze met the eyes of the lion that was gradually closing its mouth. Blood like scarlet stained its eyes. The angry roar turned into a gloomy growl. Thick saliva dripped from the corner of its mouth. It crouched down and took a step out of the wall. The first step was to accumulate strength, and the second step was to explode. Roar. With a ferocious aura, the lion actually pounced out like lightning. Dark abruptly took a few steps back, but there was no panic on his face. Although the resurrection of the lion in the mural was not within his expectations, if it was only like this, there was nothing to be afraid of. Just as his thoughts moved, a white shadow suddenly entered his field of vision from the corner of his eyes. Accompanied by a familiar aura, the white shadow nimbly slid under the lion's body. It only took an instant. That ferocious and insufferably ferocious lion's stomach was cut open. Although there was no blood splashing out, its body suddenly fell, and its life aura rapidly decreased. Even the ends of its fur became transparent. It was originally a painting, but it returned to the painting. When it drifted away with the wind, Dake saw the Dilu beast that had retracted its claws. On the wall, there was a door that was slowly opening. Next target. Following the little demon's return, Dake walked through the door in the wall. When he came out again, he was already on a path that was not recorded on the map. At this point, the map drawn by the student was no longer useful. Dake had to reconfirm the direction and make a road sign. In order to deal with this situation, he specially brought a highlighter pen. This highlighter pen used magic powder as ink. It could leave a magic mark on the wall that would last for at least a week. After 1 to 2 weeks, the magic mark would automatically dissipate and wouldn't pollute the secret path. Dake stopped to eat something and continued to search. Although the new map didn't have a reference point, the distance between the markers was obviously shortened. If everything went well, he might be able to find the marker faster than before. Originally, he thought so. But he quickly discovered that the terrain and environment of the secret path had changed from here. After a few steps, the entire secret path seemed to have merged into an ancient forest. The monotonous snow-white walls gradually disappeared, and the torches on both sides of the wall disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by ancient trees with intertwined roots, vines that wrapped around the dome, giant rocks that covered the corners, and glowing moss that was everywhere on the rocks. The dome was getting higher and higher, and the ground had more moist soil. The multicolored glowing moss reflected a strange and mysterious world. It was as if he had entered a fantasy forest in a fairy tale. His retina was filled with strong and weak colors. The enchanting aura of nature was like a drop of thick ink, exploding in an instant. Walking in this world, there was no longer only the sound of footsteps that never stopped, the rustling of the leaves, the noise of the wind, the chirping of insects. The secret path seemed to have suddenly come alive. It was full of exuberant and strange vitality. However, bright colors usually signified a hidden danger. Dake became more and more vigilant. Half an hour later, Dake felt a bit tired, so he sat down at the base of a giant tree that 6 or 7 people couldn't encircle. He took out an apple juice and took a sip. The Diru beast loyally guarded by his side, while the little devil beasts continued to explore the surroundings. The 5th marker was an anchor. But in an ancient forest, how could he find an anchor? Dake's first thought was to find a water source. The anchor might represent a ship, and the ship was anchored by the lake. But walking until now, he hadn't found a single trace of water. This was very rare in an environment with huge plants. But the environment in front of him couldn't be said to be a natural ecology, so he couldn't use common sense to understand it. He put the bottle of water back into his bag and raised his head to look at the dense shade of the trees. He felt that it wasn't complete, but it could calm his heart. If he didn't talk about the dangers that could be seen everywhere, this was a good environment to cultivate one's mind. As he said that, the Diru beast's figure flashed, and a mottled green snake that blended into the shade of the trees was cut open by its claw. And then it threw it away. Not bad. Dake stood up again, revealing a trace of gratification. If it wasn't for the Diru beast's protection, he felt that he wouldn't have been able to survive in this environment for more than 10 minutes. The Diru beast crossed its arms, glanced at him, and then turned its face, the corner of its mouth raised in a secret arc. Then, save, save, save. The little demon beast was like a hornet's nest, screaming and crazily running over. Dake subconsciously put his hand into his bag, and the Diru beast's eyes flashed with a sharp light. The two of them looked at the little demon beast at the same time. Fuck! Did we really poke a hornet's nest? He saw that behind the little demon beast, there was a group of glowing, flying insects that looked like fireflies chasing after it. It was unknown how many insects there were, but the seven-colored light formed a flood, as if it was a rainbow river shuttling through the forest, as if it was a fairy tale. Dake had seen it in a book before, and it was a kind of insect called the firefly bee. Each one was the length of a finger, and the stinger that was shot out from its tail contained a rare light poison. The poisoned part would absorb blood and turn into light. As the light spread, the blood would be lost, and the flesh would wither, until it finally turned into a glowing skeleton. The firefly bee would build a nest in the skeleton, and continue to branch out and reproduce. From the description, this was a very terrifying poisonous insect. The most common way to detoxify it was to cut off the glowing part. Because the poisoned area would emit light, it was very easy to identify. While thinking, Dake raised his finger and took out a magic elf card. He held the magic elf card between his index and middle finger, and placed it on his lips to summon. In just a little more than 3 seconds, the normal summoning spell was completed. Chio Sea Lion appeared in the blue light like water. To deal with a large swarm of insects, he naturally had to use a magic elf with a large range of skills. Although the Diru beast was strong, it wasn't very compatible in this aspect. Dake could also choose from Fairy Ibu and Moon Ibu, but they were all 4-star magic elves. So this time, it was a good opportunity for the new family member to show off their skills. This was Chio Sea Lion's first battle. Momo. As soon as Chio Sea Lion appeared, it wanted to come over and touch it. Dake hurriedly stopped it and said loudly, "Use bewitching sound on the swarm." Chio Sea Lion couldn't help but tilt its head. Emo. Dake. Touch it later. Chio Sea Lion. Emo. Dake had already taken out the branch card. Don't worry, little demon beasts are never afraid of death. An instant later, Chio Sea Lion's eyes turned cold, and it opened its mouth at the swarm of insects that was rapidly approaching. Following the clear and melodious cry, bewitching sound, under the passive buff of moist sound, turned into layers of water waves that spread rapidly like a layer of ripples, covering the entire sky in the blink of an eye. Bewitching sound wasn't very powerful, but it was enough to kill the firefly bees. The bewitching cry completely turned into the sound of death. Groups of firefly bees fell from the sky, their tails still flickering with 7-colored fluorescence. It was as if light had fallen to the ground, dyeing the ground with a dreamy color. Dake waved his hand, and a trace of light converged. The little demon beast had already been recalled by him into the branch card. When everything was settled, he released the little demon beast again and asked, "What did you find?" The little demon beast said excitedly, "Cat, I found a cat." Diru beast. Meow. The little demon beast immediately puffed up its cheeks. It's an anchor, not a cat. 2-in-1 4,100 words. Chapter 209. The anchor that the little demon beast found wasn't a real object. Instead, it was a picture of trees of different colors that could only be found when looking down at the forest from a high altitude. Are these the trees? Dake followed the little demon beast's guidance to the location of the anchor. Sure enough, he found a tree of different colors. The thickness of this tree was only enough for one person to wrap their arms around it, but the trunk was straight and long. The leaves were as dense as red maples. His understanding of plants was still limited, so he couldn't distinguish the species of this tree. But there was no need for that right now. With the little demon beast's reminder, Dake quickly found that the arrangement of the red leaves was indeed a bit unique. It just happened to form the shape of an anchor. But if this was the 5th landmark, then what should he do next? Dake couldn't help but take out the treasure map and carefully look at it. But there was no path to speak of on the treasure map. It was basically a line between 2 landmarks. 1 second to remember. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. He carefully looked at it, and then circled around the red leaves that formed the anchor. Finally, he came to the red leaves that formed the anchor tip. There was no other reason, but he felt that the so-called anchor was actually quite similar to an arrow. If he had to find a special point, it should be where the anchor tip pointed. Is there a secret hidden in this tree? Or is it hinting that I should go in the direction the anchor tip points? He immediately signaled the little demon beast, and the Diru beast to first search the red leaves in front of him. 10 minutes later, the search was fruitless. He began to try to move in the direction the anchor tip pointed. He didn't expect to find the 6th landmark as soon as he started walking. It was an unprecedentedly large cherry blossom tree. The large tree crown was in the shape of a perfect umbrella. The pink cherry blossoms swayed in the wind like clouds. The fragrance of the flowers was strong but not greasy. The surrounding environment was also comfortable and elegant. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't have time to stop during the exploration, this would definitely be a good place to have a picnic. Dake continued to move forward. The following exploration was unexpectedly smooth. There was almost no danger on the way, and there was no need to solve puzzles. It was as if he was looking at the scenery along the way and naturally found the landmarks. The 7th landmark was a landscape mural carved on the mountain wall. The mural without any artificial traces was actually very famous. It was said that it was completely formed naturally, but it had a foundation that was not inferior to the work of a famous master. Dake happened to have seen it in Claire's travels. Claire had hand-drawn it and printed it as an illustration. It was almost exactly the same as the mural in front of him. The 8th marker was a jade statue of a young girl praying. It was also naturally formed and flawless. The 9th marker was an enchanting lake with steam rising from it like a cloud. A group of snow-white fish with golden-red eyes were swimming in the lake. The 10th landmark was a vast field of flowers. Countless exotic flowers and grasses were spread out in the open terrain, decorating the earth like exquisite embroidery. Butterflies and birds danced among the flowers, not escaping at all when someone approached. Every time Dake walked to a place, he would draw a picture of that place. His footsteps also became less hurried. He gradually felt that from the moment he entered this ancient forest, this exploration journey was less of a test and more of an experience. It was as if Yvette was showing a poetic picture scroll to those who came after her. From the red-leafed forest to the giant cherry blossom tree, then to the natural mural, Holy Maiden statue, Yunza Lake, myriad flower garden, many beautiful sights and wonders from all over the world were moved to this path of exploration by her. Every part of the path forward was full of surprises. Dake truly felt Yvette's intentions. It was probably a sudden whim when she was a student, following the trend of leaving behind treasures for those who came after her. Even if the treasures in the end were not satisfactory, just the beautiful experience of this exploration path alone was worth the price of the previous trip. I wonder if the treasure map left behind by Brave Brett is the same? The glowing moss on the rocks dimmed, and the fungi on the roots and branches gradually emitted light. Although the soft and dark light could still illuminate the path ahead, it was as if the forest was covered with a layer of black gauze, turning from day to night. The path ahead gradually became steeper and continued to go uphill. Dake found the 15th marker on the mountainside. It was an inadvertent glance. The entire forest was in his field of vision. Large amounts of fungi were densely planted at the edge of the forest, emitting an extremely dense pink light in the dark environment. The outline of the forest that was illuminated was actually a huge heart. Dake stared at it for half a minute and finally couldn't help but sigh. My maiden heart is about to overflow. Apart from the location of the treasure, there is only one last marker left. Let's rest here for a while. Since he had already reached this step, Dake was prepared to continue until he found the treasure. However, after this day he was already a bit tired, so he could sit down to eat, drink, and rest for a while. For today's adventure, he specially prepared sandwiches and jerky that could be stored for a long time. He took them out and ate them with fruit juice, which had a different flavor. The little fiend and the Dilu beast sat on his left and right, curiously looking at the forest below the mountain. Dake's thoughts moved, and he simply spent some time to summon the rest of the magic guide fairies. A total of 10 magic guide fairies were sitting on the mountainside in this quiet night, curiously and happily looking at the rare night forest scenery. They were born in the castle. Apart from the little fiend, only the Hawkman had flown out of the castle last night. Although the rest of the magic guide fairies had the idea of going out to wander, they didn't have the time to do so. The night forest scenery in front of them was the most vast, and the most beautiful scenery they had seen since they were born. Dake and the magic guide fairies sat together and shared the sketches of the scenery they had recorded on their exploration journey. The smile on their faces gradually warmed. The night was slightly cold. Dake packed up his things and continued on his way. Apart from the little fiend and the Dilu beast, the rest of the magic guide fairies had already been stored in the card. Now that he had reached this point, continuing up the mountain became the only way. The remaining 16th landmark was no longer a hand-drawn landscape. Instead, it was a small and cute lizard with big round eyes. Thinking of the panda and cat from before, Dake couldn't help but raise his guard. There was only one landmark left before he reached the treasure trove. According to normal logic, it was very likely to be the final boss. Therefore, even if that lizard was actually a ferocious dragon, Dake wouldn't be too surprised. He gradually climbed up the mountain peak. In front of him was a forest with densely packed trees. Thus he continued forward. About 10 minutes later, his eyes suddenly opened up. After passing through the forest of trees, it was a relatively open flat ground. Further ahead was the endless clouds. He had already arrived at the cliff. Little fiend. The little fiend immediately obeyed the order. It flapped its wings and flew outside the cliff, lowering its head to look down. With one look it was frightened. It hurriedly turned back, and used its claws and wings to describe what it saw. Speak human language. Dake said helplessly. Only then did the little fiend calm down. It stuck out its tongue and said, "It's really a dragon." "It's really a dragon?" Dake carefully touched the edge of the cliff. A strong smell of sulfur hit him in the face. He hurriedly covered his mouth and nose to prevent himself from coughing. Looking down from here, it was a small basin like a volcanic crater. The monster that was marked as a lizard but was actually a dragon was entrenched in it, snoring. It was a demonic dragon with a body length of more than 10 meters. There seemed to be magma flowing in the gaps between its red scales. Not far behind it was a dragon's den. According to the popular script of The Hero Fights the Evil Dragon, in that era, the dragon's den should be the last 17th landmark, which was also the place where the treasure was. It's really like this? Dake had an ominous feeling when he checked the treasure map early in the morning. The young boys and girls of that era always had an inexplicable desire to slay a dragon. That was not right. It was the same even in this era. Otherwise, Alibaba's 14 Styles of the Dragon Slayer would not be so popular. Whether it was the hero fights the evil dragon to save the princess who was captured by the evil dragon, or the adventurer fights the evil dragon to obtain glory and treasure, the vitality of such stories was terrifying. There was a high probability that Yvette was influenced by those stories when she designed this level. The only fortunate thing was that the demonic dragon in front of him was about 5 meters long without its head and tail. It was not one of those extremely terrifying giant dragons. In other words, it was most likely a third-tier monster. It might be even lower. It might even be a second-tier 6-star monster. This treasure was originally prepared for the students of the academy. It would be unreasonable for it to be more difficult. Dake carefully measured the combat power in his hands. and felt that it was not a big problem. With just a thought, several plans appeared in his mind. The most direct and effective method was undoubtedly to crush it with brute force. For this, he had to make the most thorough preparations. He had to kill it in one blow. He could not give the demonic dragon any chance to counterattack. Magic guide summon. Under the dim light of the night, a golden-haired youth stood on top of a cliff, overlooking the cliff with a magic guide card in his hand. In just a little more than 3 seconds, a magic guide fairy was summoned. The Diru beast was guarding Dake very cautiously. When it saw the appearance of illusory beast, Ibu, which only had 100 magic attack and defense, it could not help but reveal a trace of confusion. However, Dake immediately used Pride 2. Knew and forcefully raised Ibu to 2-star. Then he continued to summon. This time, it took more than a minute to cast the spell. The 4-star magic guide fairy, Big Milk Can, quietly appeared during the usual summon. Moo! Big Milk Can stuck to Dake's body as soon as it appeared. A trace of disgust flashed in the Diru beast's eyes. Especially when Dake gently stroked Big Milk Can's head and said, "Please." The disgust in its eyes deepened. However, Big Milk Can was unprecedentedly excited. Everything was ready. Dake took a deep breath and once again summoned Kettle for insurance. The sleeping mystic dragon did not know that disaster had arrived. It was like a legendary dragon that had mysteriously become a public nuisance. It was clearly living in the depths of the forest, guarding the treasures it had accumulated over the years. However, there were people called heroes who came to rob it. Not only did they skin it and pull out its tendons, they also took away all its treasures. What was even more excessive was that there were so-called adventurers who only wanted the so-called Dragon Slayer title. Just for a mere false title, they crazily hunted down and killed the dragon. As for the evil dragon snatching the princess drama, was there a mistake? The size of a princess? It was as if being a dragon was the original sin. Fortunately, the dragon in front of them was not a real life with flesh and blood. Dake was ruthless and did not feel any pressure. He slightly retreated to a safe place and asked the magic guide fairies, "Are you ready?" Busy. Moo. Dake slightly nodded. Very good. Big Milk Can use round transformation. The Big Milk Can suddenly became spirited. It curled its body into a circle, and a layer of bright metallic luster flashed on its surface. Its defense skyrocketed. Then Dake gave an order to Ibu-chan, "Use help." Ibu-chan immediately stood up and clapped her hands to cheer for the Big Milk Can. As the cheering grew louder, its body released a strong light. Then, the light left its body and drilled into the Big Milk Can's body. At this moment, the Big Milk Can felt a huge amount of energy being injected into its body. Dake's eyes flashed. Now's the time. Big Milk Can use roll. The Big Milk Can did not hesitate to roll forward, rolling down from the top of the cliff, with the help of round transformation. And the huge potential, it could perfectly solve the weakness of roll. Low initial power. Roll, which originally only had a power of 30, increased to a full 90 points. Even though Help's power could only be used for the first roll, it was enough. From the second roll onwards, the power of roll was 120. The third roll was 240. The fourth roll was 480. The fifth roll was 960. As long as the fifth roll was maxed out, even a 7-star giant dragon would not be able to withstand the damage of roll. Under the effect of the acceleration, the Big Milk Can rolled faster and faster. The rolling became stronger and stronger. An extremely strong airflow exploded around it, as if it could crush everything. The Diru beast quietly walked to the edge of the cliff and suddenly jumped down. The demon dragon was finally awakened by the sound of roll. It suddenly opened its eyes from its deep sleep. A terrifying dragon's aura suddenly descended, shaking one's soul. However, in the next moment, the large milk can that had curled up into a round shape ran over its face, leaving a tire mark on its face. When it roared in extreme anger, a white cat suddenly appeared in its eyes. In its vision, a red light suddenly enlarged. The demon dragon fell into chaos. 2-in-1 4,100 words. Chapter 210. The success of Dilu Beast's cat's eye made Dake, who was on the cliff, let out a sigh of relief. The biggest fear of the milk can's roll was that it would be interrupted at the beginning. The first roll was especially easy to be blocked, but as long as it passed the early stage, the speed and power of each roll would increase exponentially. When it came to the third roll, even if the opponent wanted to block it, it would be very difficult to do so. The power of 240 moves could be said to be the peak of sprite moves. It was already a very terrifying level. Not to mention that there were 2 more exponential increases. Now that the demon dragon was confused by Cat's Eye, it could guarantee that the milk can's second roll would also hit successfully. And as expected, the milk can relied on the mountain wall to turn around, and with an extremely fierce momentum, it once again crushed the demon dragon's right face. Website: https://m.vipcanchu. VIP. The dragon's scales were crushed and deformed, and the demon dragon suddenly let out a painful howl. The Dilu beast took advantage of the gap and used a cat fist on its lower jaw. Boom! The demonic dragon suddenly closed its mouth and bit down on its own tongue. Because of this, its eyes became moist, and tears were about to fall down. But under the stimulation of the pain, its confused state was also dispelled. It almost subconsciously waved its dragon tail and swept it over. In an instant, a sandstorm rose. The strong wind carried the sand and dust and shot out like bullets. Dilu Beast only had time to cross its arms and protect its chest before it was hit by the dragon tail. After a moment of stagnation, Dilu Beast's body was sent flying and smashed into the mountain wall with a boom. Suddenly, the mountain wall collapsed and even the top of the cliff shook. For a moment, Dake thought that Dilu Beast was gone, but its arms seemed to have worked and there was still magic left. The strength of the demon dragon was beyond imagination. Kettle! Before he could shout, Kettle's eyes had already exploded with a strong light. It used its superpower with all its strength and surrounded itself in the light of its superpower. Power trick. Kettle's attack and defense were instantly switched under the effect of its superpower. Attack, 0 2200, defense, 2200 0. Defense is equal. The next moment, the light of the superpower shot towards the demonic dragon that was roaring in pain. On the surface of Kettle's card, the defense value instantly rose. It actually jumped from 0 to 1,700 points after the attack and defense swap. This meant that the Mystic Dragon's original defense could be as high as 3,400 points. If this Mystic Dragon wasn't good at defense, Dake's eyes were filled with shock. He immediately realized that the demonic dragon before him was most likely an 8-star demonic creature of the 3rd rank. Even if it was only an 8-star whiteboard, it was still in existence that the junior students could only look up to. So Yvette's treasure map wasn't left for the juniors at all? But that's true. Who can guarantee that their juniors can pass through the giant bear and lion's checkpoint unscathed? It's very likely that this treasure map is hidden in a place that only the upperclassmen can obtain. Maybe it's in a reference book that only the senior students would use. Headmaster Erdi, I really did something stupid. While Dake smiled bitterly, a new magic card appeared in his hands. Meanwhile, the milk can in the basin had completed its turn and started rolling for the 3rd time. After 3 times, the power of rolling had increased to 240 points. Whether it was its speed or strength, it had reached a level that a normal 4-star demonic creature could not achieve. However, facing the demonic dragon that was most likely an 8-star demonic dragon, this little bit of power was not enough. In the name of Dake Dimung, sacrifice summon. In order to help the milk can complete its 3rd roll, Dake unleashed his power in the face of danger, and finally compressed the casting time of the sacrifice summon to 10 seconds. The Dilu beast that was smashed into the mountain wall suddenly turned into light and rose up. A huge sacrificial summoning circle lit up on the mountain wall, and instantly attracted the demonic dragon's attention. However, it was still in pain at that moment. It only glanced at the sacrificial summoning circle, and turned its anger toward the milk can that was rolling toward it. Puff! 2 flames came out of its nostrils. The demonic dragon faced the milk can and suddenly opened its mouth. A strong smell of sulfur came out of it, and the flames gradually shone. However, on the sacrificial summoning circle, A pink fairy with a ribbon tied around it had already appeared. She raised her head and a gentle light flowed in her eyes like water. Heartsuit, heartsuit, heartsuit. A seductive sound came from her throat and the effect of mesmerizing body spread out in the form of sound and instantly echoed in the basin. Very lucky. The demonic dragon that was guarding the treasure was a male. Fairy Ibu, who was refined with the fruit of bliss as the core, contained the power of the sin of bliss. Even an 8-star demonic dragon couldn't help but be charmed by her. Almost instantly, the pain and anger in its eyes disappeared, leaving only infatuation. The dragon's breath that was about to finish brewing in its mouth was also swallowed back into its throat. Then the milk can rolled for the third time and finally hit its body. The mystic dragon, whose defense had been reduced by half, took a vicious blow. The mountain-like body was almost sent flying by the milk jug. Although it was not obvious from the outside, its aura was clearly weakened by a lot. However, after this hit, Huohua's superpower had reached its limit. The light surrounding the demonic dragon suddenly collapsed, and its defense was restored. There was a hint of struggle in his eyes, which had a heartsuit symbol at the bottom of his eyes. The difference in star level was finally reflected. Originally, the debuff of a sure kill skill that crossed one level would be weakened by a corresponding degree. The debuff of a sure kill skill that crossed 2 levels was almost useless. The Dilu Beast and Fairy Ibu's sure kill skills had such a significant effect on the demonic dragon, which was already very OP. Huohua's equal defense only lasted for a very short time. In just a moment, the demonic dragon would definitely be able to break free from the mesmerizing status. Even so, it was already too late. On the cliff, Dake took out another magic card and carefully observed the situation below. The milk can had already entered its 4th round of rolling. It could be said that the momentum was already set and could not be stopped. Although the demonic dragon was already struggling, it was still under the control of the charm. This 4th roll would definitely hit. However, the demonic dragon's true defense was as high as 3,400 points. As a dragon species, its vitality would definitely not be low. It might even be able to withstand the 4th attack. In the end, the milk can's basic attack was too low. This greatly limited its performance. From this, it could be inferred that the outcome of this battle was very likely to depend on the last roll. The 4th roll was already so powerful. The 5th roll would definitely not be stopped. However, the demonic dragon had wings. Once it broke free from the charm, it would only need to flap its wings and fly into the sky. The milk can would not be able to hit it. In the short time it took to think, the milk can's 4th roll had already hit the demonic dragon's body. When it rotated, it brought about a whirlwind that was like a blade, crushing the dragon's scales that came into contact with it. One of the demonic dragon's hind legs was crushed into a bloody mess. It was already half crippled. The heart-wrenching pain further stimulated the demonic dragon's nerves, allowing it to break free from the charm. However, at this moment, its injuries were extremely severe. Ignoring the light injuries on its left and right cheeks, the milk can's 3rd and 4th rolls had caused a large amount of damage to its body. The demonic dragon felt threatened by the loss of its vitality. However, its dignity as a dragon prevented it from running away immediately. Since the start of the battle, this was the first time the poor demonic dragon had used a complete dragon breath. The flame-like dragon breath chased after the milk can's tail. However, the milk can was simply too fast. It only needed to turn a corner to avoid the dragon breath. Roar! The demonic dragon let out an extremely angry roar. The entire dragon stood up because of this person. Its lower limbs were thick and short, and its lower body was extremely stable. However, its upper limbs were small, thin and long. However, this did not stop its dragon claws from being sharp and powerful. In its extreme anger, it clenched its fists and roared at the sky. Then it violently punched the ground. The ground was actually smashed into pieces. A terrifying crack appeared, spreading towards the milk jug like a bolt of lightning. Although Big Milk can manage to dodge the direct attack of the fissure when it turned around, the sudden flood of magma that gushed out from the fissure was too late for it to dodge. However, at this moment, around the milk can's body, the airflow created by the high-speed rotation was extremely terrifying. It wrapped around its body, without leaving a single gap. As it rolled, including the airflow, its diameter was over 5 meters. Its size was not inferior to the demonic dragon in front of it. All of the lava that surged towards it was either repelled by the airflow or sucked into the airflow, causing the milk can to become like a wheel of fire. After a moment, the wheel of fire broke through the demonic dragon's defense and rolled with an unstoppable momentum. Its speed had already surpassed the limit. The resulting impact was able to suppress everything. The demonic dragon once again spat out dragon breath, but it could not break through the airflow barrier. At this moment, it finally felt the threat of death. Its dragon eyes revealed unconcealable panic. Seeing that the milk can was already in front of it, the demonic dragon could not help but flap its wings. Its bat-like wings created an updraft, and as a result, its body floated up a short distance. Then, it suddenly flapped its wings and a strong wind blew. It was about to flap its wings and fly high. However, suddenly, the milk can, which was originally a few meters away from it, crossed the distance and slammed into its body. Bang! It was unstoppable. Whether it was the hard dragon scales, the thick leather, or the steel-like dragon bones. In front of the milk can's fifth roll, they were like paper toys. They were crushed, and exploded. Its final roar was forever stuck in its throat. Its life faded away like the wind. It's over. Dake straightened its back and put down the flash spell in its hand. From the moment the milk can rolled down the cliff to the moment the demonic dragon was crushed into light, the entire process lasted less than a few minutes. Ibu's help. Dilu Beast's cat's eyes, Huhu's equal defense, Fairy Ibu's mesmerizing body, plus mesmerizing voice, and finally, the flicker curse. All of this was to help the milk can complete its fifth roll. Even if it was an 8-star demonic dragon, after losing the initiative, it fell step by step and was completely crushed by this hellish roll. At the last moment, Dake didn't let down his guard. Little Devil. Under his command, the little devil took the lead and flew down the cliff. It first circled around the basin, and then flew into the dragon's cave. After a while, it flew out of the dragon's cave and brought the good news that it was safe. Dake looked for a slightly flatter path and climbed down bit by bit. Meow, Fairy Ibu stretched out its ribbon tentacles and hugged him halfway down. Then it happily rubbed against him. The little devil immediately pouted, but it couldn't say much in front of the hero of the battle. The milk can that drank a bottle of milk also slowly walked over. It stood in front of Dake and looked forward. Dake smiled and rubbed its head. He praised, "Well done." The milkkin immediately showed an expression that was even happier than when it crushed the demonic dragon. The little devil beast impatiently flew in a figure-8 pattern in the air and impatiently said, "Treasure, treasure." The treasure was in front of him, but Dake wasn't in a hurry. He looked around the basin and replenished the mana of the Diru beast. The Diru beast on the card hugged its chest and showed a dissatisfied expression. It was dissatisfied that it wasn't able to last until the end. Dake softly comforted it and waited for its mana to be replenished before summoning it again. Not long after, Huhu and Ibu also arrived at the basin with Fairy Ibu's help. Since they all contributed in the battle, they naturally had to reap the rewards together. Dake waited for everyone to arrive before entering the dragon's cave. The little devil didn't fly too deep. However, the first half of the dragon's cave was clearly safe. After reaching the middle, it wasn't certain anymore. Dark had never been afraid to speculate about Arvette's intentions. No one could be sure that she wouldn't set up a trap at the final checkpoint. As they went deeper, the air became drier and a pungent smell came from inside. Dake covered his nose until his sense of smell got tired. In the end, the trap didn't appear. Dake gave the magic guide fairies a round of mana, and then continued forward. They finally arrived at the treasure trove. However, the expected piles of gold coins and jewels didn't appear. Nor was there a scene that was commonly seen in adventure novels. The discovery of a dragon's egg. Dake was actually looking forward to it. Even if it wasn't a dragon egg and was a dragon-type magic guide fairy card, it would still be a huge profit. However, it wasn't. Nothing was there. He and the magic guide fairies stood at the entrance of the treasure cave, looking at the final treasure trove with a dumbfounded expression. The entire cave was covered with glossy and shiny mirrors. From top to bottom, there wasn't a single gap. When he opened his eyes, he saw countless reflections of himself in the mirrors with shocked expressions. It was exactly the same as the secret room White found. 2-in-1-4/100. Chapter 211. Dake didn't know that the treasure trove left behind by the hero had the same layout. Otherwise, he would have guessed that it was a trend at the time. However, he didn't stop because of this. Instead, he carefully crept in. Of course, Yvette wouldn't create a mirror room for no reason. There had to be a secret behind it. This should be the last puzzle. After confirming that there was no danger, Dake put down his bag and took out a magic pen. He had brought a lot of tools with him this time, but without any prior information, he could only use the magic pen to test the magic power of each mirror, hoping to find something. However, the treasure trove that was supposed to be the dragon's nest was much larger than the hero's treasure trove. The entire process was troublesome and would take more time than expected. However, he had brought 3 days' worth of rations, so he had enough time to research. Meanwhile, under White's lead, Seakeet and the others found the hero's treasure trove. Remember the URL? VIP, can't you? 6 because they had already been here once. Their search for the treasure was relatively smooth. However, there seemed to be some minor changes in the secret passage, causing them to take a few wrong turns and waste some time. Now that they had found the secret room again, White looked at the room full of mirrors and entrusted the task of solving the puzzle to the 2 seniors. This is the hero's treasure trove? Seakeet walked into the secret room first. He looked very excited. After all, this was something left behind by the hero. After hearing the hero's story from their parents, many children in this era would fantasize about inheriting the hero's legacy and growing up to be an indomitable hero. In the past, Seakeet was also a child who liked to fantasize. He was also excited about becoming a magus for a long time. However, his fantasies were shattered in the face of cruel reality. Although he wanted to work hard again, it was difficult for him to do so. His situation was very similar to White's, so he empathized with White's situation. However, the difference between him and White was that White had greater talent than most magi, while he didn't. But if White could succeed with his help, he felt that there was a chance for him to get back on his feet. This kind of thinking of simply placing one's hopes on others without putting in any effort was actually a kind of escape. But this was Seakeet. He was a cowardly person who couldn't bear the burden on his shoulders. Seakeet couldn't find anything in the secret room. He fixed his bangs in front of the mirror and walked out of the secret room with a shrug. Unfortunately, it seems that I'm not the one chosen by the hero. As expected, Seakeet. Betty made no attempt to hide her sneer. White said worriedly, "If that's the case, we can only rely on you." Betty said confidently, "I heard that heroes' grades aren't that good, so the puzzle he set up won't be too difficult." White's expression turned gloomy for a moment. There must be a reason why Betty was dumped by her ex-boyfriend. She definitely hadn't read the book called Emotional Intelligence. But Betty's IQ wasn't low. Although she wasn't the top student in the 4th grade, she was still an excellent student and could use all kinds of knowledge with ease. Before entering the secret room, she took out a pair of glasses from her backpack and put them on. They finally made her feel like a scholar. White asked curiously, "What kind of glasses are those?" Seakeet glanced at him and said, "Magic glasses. You can see traces of the flow of magic. They're often used when refining items." White understood. So they're only used in the 2nd grade and above. Seakeet. "No, if I remember correctly, you'll start using these high-end tools in the 2nd semester of the 1st grade. White scratched his head awkwardly. But after entering the secret room, Betty couldn't help but frown. The secret room was full of chaotic magic power, which was the residue of Seakeet's magic power. In this case, she had to wait for the magic power to disperse naturally before she could study the mirror in more detail. Until then, she could only make some deductions by observing the shape and arrangement of the mirrors. A few hours later, Betty heaved a sigh. Mirrors were good carriers of magic power. Ancient mages often used mirrors made of mercury to cast spells, especially curses. Therefore, the magic power attached to the mirrors dissipated very slowly. She had to take the initiative to remove the residue of Seekit's magic power after a long time. After the interference was removed, she adjusted her magic glasses and pointed at one of the mirrors. She began to carefully observe the flow of magic on the mirror. She was inclined to believe that the mirror itself was a kind of magic tool. If she could find a suitable method, she might be able to open the mirror world, and the so-called treasure should be hidden in the mirror world. After all, the secret room was only so big. Without such a design, there was no way to hide anything. Unless, the treasure left by the hero was not a physical object, but some kind of precious information. But that information should be conveyed through the mirror as a carrier. It was very likely that a lock was set up. Therefore, the most important goal now was to find the lock. Only when the lock was found could the lock be unlocked. This might be a very long process. People who were good at seeking knowledge were always full of patience. After Betty officially started her research, she no longer cared about the passage of time. White, Seekit, and Luobot, who pushed all the research to her, waited outside the secret room. White and Seekit naturally gathered together. Luobot leaned on the side, watching them talk and laugh in a low voice, his eyes gradually turning cold. In this situation, he and White should be together, while Seekit should be hiding in the corner and watching. This made him feel very uncomfortable. In the shadows where the firelight could not reach, a bat appeared out of nowhere and quietly hid in the corner. The corners of its wings turned into black mist, making it perfectly blend into the darkness. In a secret passage far away, a pale figure stood upright in the shadows like a zombie. As the night deepened, he opened his eyes. Blood-like liquid flowed around his feet. In that instant, he became active. Starting from his toes, the blood climbed up to his neck, forming a dark red high collar. In the blink of an eye, a nobleman who seemed to have crawled out of a picture book, wearing a vampire suit that was typical of humans, walked out of the shadows. His skin was as pale as a corpse, his eyes scarlet like blood, and the corners of his mouth were slightly open, revealing 2 pairs of sharp fangs. He was cold and handsome, elegant and noble. He was like a blood aristocrat who had awakened from an eternal slumber, achieving eternity in the night. But when hunger took over his brain, when scarlet filled his eyes, the thirst for blood crushed his elegant demeanor. The vampire, who should have been extinct, showed a ferocious and twisted face in the dark and silent passage. The hoarse roar squeezed out from his throat was filled with indescribable ferocity and madness. He dragged his stiff limbs and followed his biological instincts, taking a step in the direction of the intruder. Danger was coming. In the dragon's nest, Dake's research also came to a halt. He spent a long time testing the magic power of each mirror, but the final result was clear at a glance. None of the mirrors that he tested had any special reaction to magic power. It was as if they were all just ordinary mirrors. This made Dake wonder if he had missed 1 or 2 mirrors. He walked back and forth on the mirrors repeatedly, racking his brain to think, but to no avail. Is it the lack of necessary knowledge that limits my thinking? Dake gradually became irritable. Why don't I take them apart? This was not a joke. Breaking the old rules and opening up a new path was not a bad idea. It was late at night, but Dake did not feel sleepy. He sat down and stared at one of the mirrors, trying to suppress the desire to take the mirror apart. After a long struggle, a thought naturally came to his mind. What was behind these mirrors? Humans had the desire to vent violence from birth, tearing up pieces of paper, smashing toys, destroying all the rules that restrained them. After an unknown amount of time, he stood up abruptly, scaring the little demon beast guarding the cave entrance so much that it quivered. The same thought uncontrollably appeared in Betty's mind. The mirrors that filled the secret room made people irritable. If the entrance to the secret room was not sealed by the mirrors, this would be a terrifying mirror room that could drive people crazy. Betty had to walk out of the secret room to relieve her emotions. When she saw White and the other 2, she could not help but complain. Can't you be a little bit more useful? White picked up the noodles that had just been cooked and said politely, "Senior sister, eat some first?" Betty glanced at the noodles with only 2 pieces of jerky floating in the air. She had no appetite, but she still took it and said, "Thank you." The night was cold. The hot soup of the noodles could still warm people's hearts. Luobo was still leaning in the corner. He had been watching White and see Keat cooking noodles. He thought White would ask him to eat, or even better, bring him a bowl. But that bowl was now in Betty's hands. After a long time, White said impatiently, "Luobo, are you going to keep standing there? Come and eat the noodles." Luobo touched his stomach and slowly walked over. He felt like an outsider. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have followed. What's the use of the mirror? Dark suddenly stood up and walked to the back of the little fiendish magical beast as he asked. The little monster looked up with a confused expression. It wanted to tell its master that it was just a ruthless shark, not some high IQ reasoning character. However, under Dark's gaze, it still racked its brain to come up with an answer. "Wash your face according to it." Seeing that Dake didn't respond, it said softly, "Dress yourself up? Talk to yourself? Magic mirror, who's the most beautiful in this world?" Dake shook his head. The corners of his mouth curved up slightly, showing a smile that hadn't appeared in a long time. The purpose of the mirror is to reflect light. Dake realized that he had gotten into the wrong way of thinking. Because of the strange experiences he had along the way, he instinctively associated the mirror with magic, but neglected the original purpose of the mirror. Standing at the entrance of the cave and looking inside, it was easy to think of a toy that was once made in elementary school. The Wanhua mirror. The Wanhua mirror was a Wanhua tube. It was an optical toy that used the reflection of light from a mirror and placed a prism in the middle of the tube to create a strange and beautiful visual image. This world seemed to have a similar tool, but it hadn't been sold as a toy. Mages were more willing to see it as a magic tool. Even if it didn't involve any elements related to magic, this didn't stop mages from calling it mirror magic. Dake wasn't sure if he had found the right answer for now, but it was at least a line of thought. He left the dragon's nest and summoned Fairy Ibu at the entrance of the cave. Among all his magic guiding fairies, Fairy Ibu was one of the few that could freely use light magic. The other was Moon Ibu in the Bliss 3, Moon state, but it wasn't under his control. When Fairy Ibu was summoned, it immediately used a ribbon to wrap around Dake's arm. A sweet smell emanated from the ribbon. Dark squatted down and rubbed his face against it. Then he told it his request. Fairy Ibu cried out excitedly, showing that it had no problems. "That's good." Dake let out a sigh of relief. He was most worried that Fairy Ibu wouldn't be able to use light magic to support the experiment, but now it seemed that its high intelligence had helped it break through the shackles of a magic fairy. It was different from other magic fairies that could only release their skills step by step. It could already control its skills within a certain range. For example, it could control the power of the moon force to 0 and only condense the summoned moonlight into a small beam of light. If Fairy Ibu couldn't do this, Dake would have to find a way to make a simple condenser that could shoot out a beam of light. But that would be very difficult. Perhaps he would have to leave the secret passage and go to the Traveler's Street to buy something like a condenser and start over. Fortunately, Fairy Ibu was cute enough. Dake called the little fiendish magical beast to retreat behind Fairy Ibu, while he prepared a pen and paper to take notes at any time. In the next moment, moonlight suddenly sprinkled down from above. Fairy Ibu bathed in the moonlight was beautiful and otherworldly, like a fairy that had fallen from the heavens. It raised its head and let the moonlight condense in its mouth, before finally shooting out a beam of light that didn't have any damage. That beam of light was like a laser, shining in the middle of a mirror facing the entrance of the cave. It was then reflected by the mirror to another mirror, and then to another mirror. Almost in an instant, the continuous reflection of the beam of light created a beautiful formation of light in the dragon's nest. 2 in 1, 4,100 words. Chapter 212. Is this the treasure Yalvet left behind? Dark stared intently at the fantastical and magnificent light array diagram, and a sense of accomplishment welled up in his heart. He knew in his heart that he would be able to reach out and ask for such a treasure when he returned home during the summer vacation. But the feeling of relying on one's own efforts to get something was different from reaching out and asking for it. After he calmed down a little, he immediately picked up a pen and paper and started to record. The moonlight beam condensed by Ivan the fairy wouldn't last long, and he had to record it as soon as possible. However, the complexity of this array diagram still exceeded his expectations. It wasn't flat, but a three-dimensional picture. That increased the difficulty of recording it. By the time the light disappeared, Dake had only finished a small part of it. He wasn't in a hurry, walking into the cave and accurately measuring the part he had drawn according to the angle of the mirror, while waiting for the cool down of the moon force to finish. 1 second to memorize. https://m. Vip can't you? Vip in any case, the mirror wouldn't suddenly disappear. And he still had a lot of time to record it. He just didn't know what the array Yalvet had left behind was. Was it a magical array or a refined array? Dake was more inclined to think of a refined array. And it was most likely a refined array that Yalvet had created herself. Yalvet was one of the many heroes who had come out of Shengmalian. Like most of the heroes, she had already made her mark in the academy. That wasn't just in terms of power, but also in terms of academics. Just as Claire had developed the zoo on her own, Yalvet had also laid the foundation for herself to become a goddess of war. Her attainments in the weaponized series of magic cards were so deep that no one could surpass her. The treasure that time could very well be a refined array related to that. The weaponized series of magic cards was a branch of the prop card. It was different from the simple equipment card. The weaponized series of magic cards had a prominent characteristic, which was that they required attire. To give a relatively simple example, the equipment change card was a kind of extremely simple weaponized card. The weaponized card usually gathered an entire set of equipment into one card, which could be attired, to complete the transformation. The more famous Masked Knight series and the 12 Golden Holy Suit series were both classified as weaponized cards. There was also a Magical Girl series, which was also very famous. At first, the Magisters used the armed card on the Magisters, but later they found that the armed card had very strict requirements on the size of the Magisters. Moreover, very few Magisters could properly unleash the true power of the armed card. In addition, armed cards and magic elves were similar. If they wanted to last for a long time, they would need to consume magic power. The higher the frequency of usage, the more magic power would be consumed. The magic power of the enchanted fairy was already insufficient. If he were to use the armed card, it would be gone in 3 seconds. Therefore, in the end, the Magisters basically used the armed card on themselves. A sufficiently powerful armed card could turn a weak Magister into a combat professional with terrifying strength in the blink of an eye. Dake was very interested in the armed card. It wasn't just because he wanted to recreate the holy garment. When he had nothing to do, he would occasionally think about it. Was Gundam considered a weapon? Was Ultraman considered a weapon? What about Iron Man? This was a problem. Archmage was actually a very creative profession. As his skills improved, the number of things he could do would be unimaginable. Time passed by little by little. After 2 more images, Dark finally managed to draw a rough outline of the diagram. As for the accurate measurement and drawing, he planned to record it when he woke up the next morning, and his brain was clear enough. On the other side, White and the others who didn't find anything were also preparing to go to bed. Both of them brought inflatable sleeping bags. The palm-sized sleeping bags could expand to 2 meters long as they were filled with air. These preparations were necessary to sleep outside on a winter night. The next morning, the research continued. It was just that Dake was at the finishing stage, while White hadn't found a solution. This was the result of the difference in basic education. Betty was more focused on the points related to magic, so she neglected the fact that this was actually a simple optical design. White and the other 2 didn't put their minds on solving the puzzle at all. In the afternoon, Dark had already recorded the entire diagram. He even began to study it. If he shone the light beam on the mirror from different angles, or if he could change the mirror as a starting point, he would be able to obtain something. In the end, he really did find something. As Goddess Evie's moonlight shone on one of the mirrors, a new diagram of light appeared in the mirror room. This result made Dake excited. He realized that the numerous mirrors in the cave weren't just for decoration. Almost every mirror had its uses. Evening. Dark went one step further and found the third array diagram. After recording the third array diagram, Dark carefully observed it. Suddenly, a thought struck him and he stacked the three array diagrams together in his mind. Soon after, he discovered that they seemed to form a complete sphere. A trinity? Dake gradually had an idea. There were a total of 3 diagrams hidden in the mirror room. After that, he didn't find anything new. The instruction manual that he was looking forward to didn't exist either. But this wasn't a big problem. Now that he had the diagrams in hand, he only needed to investigate Yvette's creative achievements during her time as a student to figure out the use of this diagram. The Valkyrie couldn't have taken something from the textbook and used it as a treasure, right? It was late at night. After Dake ate and drank his fill, he prepared to sleep comfortably and returned to the dormitory after daybreak. Due to the joy of his harvest, he slept very soundly. The little devil beast wrapped itself in the scarf and fell asleep right next to its cheek. In the past 2 days, they had confirmed that the dragon's lair was very safe. In fact, after the mystic dragon was defeated, the entire ancient forest became quiet. Many mechanisms seemed to have completed their mission and stopped operating. The only reason it hadn't been destroyed on the spot was because there were still people inside. While Dake went to sleep early, White and the others, who hadn't found anything, started a bonfire out of boredom. Even though the bonfire was a toy sold on Traveler's Street and was essentially a magic furnace, it still added some atmosphere. But under the illumination of the fire, the 3 didn't look too good. White was disappointed, Luo Boat was irritated, and Sea Keat was a bit ashamed of her solemn vow before entering the secret passage. After a whole day, they were no longer as calm as they were last night. Only Betty was still racking her brains in the secret room. But after a while, Betty had no choice but to come out of the secret room full of mirrors. She rubbed her forehead and felt that her eyes were blurry. "Sea Keat, do you have hot coffee?" Betty dragged her feet to the bonfire to replenish her sugar. She crazily added sugar cubes into her coffee. "Wait a bit." Sea Keat took out a small can of coffee from her bag and threw it into the unboiled water. Betty sat down beside her and hugged her knees as she looked forward. Her gaze was gradually attracted by the bonfire. White couldn't help but ask, "Senior, did you find anything?" Betty was still staring at the bonfire and ignored him. "White, Senior?" Betty suddenly stood up. "I found it." "White, what did you find?" "Betty, we need a highly condensed light source." As an idea flashed in Betty's head, White's journey of treasure hunting finally came to an end. Betty created a simple light emitter that could emit a bright beam of light on the spot. Then, she immediately entered the secret room and shone the beam of light on the mirror. Half a minute later, she walked out of the secret room in delight. White, who had been waiting anxiously at the entrance of the secret room, hurried to ask, "How did it go? Did it work?" Betty raised her eyebrows and said smugly, "Of course. Don't you know who I am?" White said excitedly, "Let me see." Betty gave him the light emitter. "Just inject magic power into it." White immediately rushed into the secret room, unable to wait any longer. After he injected magic power into the light emitter, he shone the beam of light at the mirror in front of him according to Betty's instructions. Immediately, a diagram of light appeared before him. "So, it's such a simple design?" White's face flushed, and his hands trembled in excitement. "Is this the treasure that my father left behind? What kind of diagram is it? A super ancient magic array? An exclusive array? Or a special spell that can be displayed in the form of a picture?" He couldn't help but fantasize. Outside the secret room, Sea Keat asked curiously, "Did you find anything?" Betty glanced at him and said cheerfully, "It should be a spell." Sea Keat said excitedly, "A spell left behind by a hero? I'm going to take a look." Betty, however, shook her head. "That's not a good idea. Since it's something left behind by a hero, it should be received by his son. Besides, it's not a spell that anyone can use." Sea Keat accepted her explanation. "The things left behind by a hero are always special. It's fate that White can obtain his relic." Betty rubbed her temples. I need to rest. The recording work has nothing to do with me. Seakeet shrugged. That's White's job, of course. Then Betty went to the bonfire, put on insulating gloves, and took out the hot coffee. She poured it into a teacup and stuffed it with sugar. In a dark place where no one could see, she pursed her lips slightly. Although it was a pity, she had already recognized the spell when she saw it. It was a universal spell, and indeed, not everyone could use it. It had a verification function, and according to the owner's qualifications, it would change into a form that matched them. Among them, the spell's basic functions could only be used after it changed into a weapon. Depending on the weapon, the strength of the curse would be different as well. Among them, the sword was the strongest. Its name was Fantasy Weapon Spell, and it was both a magic card and an item card. Because it was often used by heroes to summon holy swords, it was also called Holy Sword Spell. The reason why Betty knew it so clearly was that Holy Sword Spell was something that could be learned in the second semester of the 4th grade. She had already prepared it in advance. In just half a minute after she recognized the spell, she decided to keep it a secret forever. She didn't want to destroy a child's beautiful fantasy about their parents. Of course, she didn't want to hide it. But who knew that the treasure left by heroes was something that could be found in textbooks? Anyway, she would have graduated by the time White reached the 4th grade. That's terrible. 3 of the 4 people were immersed in joy. Even Luoboat was secretly happy for White. White finally thought of Luoboat. He asked Luoboat to enter the secret room and help him hold the light while he started recording. Although Holy Sword Spell was not short, at least it was a spell on a flat surface, so it wasn't difficult to draw. It took White half an hour to successfully record it. Then he called Luoboat out of the secret room. He felt refreshed. The treasure left by his father was finally in his hands. Excited, they sat around the campfire and chatted for a long time. Then they took out their sleeping bags and went to sleep. At the same time, the bat that had been hiding in the corner opened its eyes. 100 meters away, the vampires who had followed their biological instincts finally crossed the maze-like secret passageway and found their way to the vicinity. The intricate secret passage made it wander for a whole night. Its brain, which was already in a chaotic state, was twisted into a paste by irritation and hunger. Its arms were hanging down, its mouth was dripping with saliva, and its eyes were flashing fiercely. It looked like a hungry ghost crawling out of hell. As the smell of the prey got closer and closer, its hunting instinct made it stop breathing, and its footsteps were silent. The torches on both sides of the secret passage were no longer lit. It moaned in the dark. It moved stealthily in the shadows. A few minutes later, the light of the campfire was reflected in the vampire's eyes. White and the others who were sleeping didn't notice it at all. The vampire stuck out its long and sharp tongue and circled the corner of its mouth. It could feel the little remaining blood in its body boiling. Among the 4 people in the sleeping bags, the smell of one person's blood had been deeply engraved in its soul. It was the most delicious prey, the most beautiful blood bag. The pitch-black shadow attacked the 4 people. The vampire silently walked to the hero's son's side. Slowly, he suppressed the urge to bite the hero's son to pieces. Then he lowered his body and extended his fangs toward the hero's son's neck. The blood in the wine glass was delicious. But the blood flowing in the veins was the vampire's favorite. A strong stench pierced Victor's nostrils. He subconsciously frowned, and then opened his eyes in a daze. The blood-red light reflected in his eyes. The vampire bit down fiercely. 2 in 1, 4,000 words. I have to go on a long trip today. Tomorrow, I'll start the October sprint. As of today, I owe a total of 139 chapters. I still need 103 chapters equals it's too difficult. Chapter 213. White screams tore through the night sky. Betty and Seakeet woke up almost at the same time. The flickering firelight illuminated the vampire's side profile. The pale and shriveled face was turning red at a speed visible to the naked eye. White, who was pressed down by the vampire, struggled violently, but the difference in strength between the two was too obvious. His hands were clamped tightly by the vampire, and he couldn't move at all. However, this struggle only lasted for a few seconds. The hormones injected from the vampire's fangs numbed his nerves and made him calm down. Luobo woke up. He tried to open his eyes and look in White's direction, but he still thought that he was dreaming. However, this nightmare was so real that he couldn't help but feel terrified. Magic summoning. https://mvip can't you? VIP Betty's reaction was the fastest. A bright-colored, snake-like magic elf with a slender snout darted out of her sleeves almost instantly. It was a 3-star magic fairy that Betty had refined in her second year, Magic Pattern Eel. The Magic Pattern Eel was as long as a snake, with a small head and a protruding mouth full of sharp teeth that protruded from its lips. It was extremely ugly. However, its skin didn't have scales. Instead, it was covered with a layer of fine magic patterns. The magic patterns all over its body allowed it to switch between water, lightning, and poison elements, thus changing the distribution of magic attack and defense as well as its killing moves. The magic pattern eel that flew out of Betty's sleeve was covered with a layer of golden patterns. Its body was shining with lightning, and it bit at the vampire's shoulder in the blink of an eye. However, the vampire only reached out and grabbed the magic pattern eel tightly, allowing the lightning to touch his palm without feeling it. Lightning beam. Accompanied by Betty's angry roar, the magic pattern eel suddenly opened its snake-like mouth, and the lightning all over its body surged into its mouth, turning into condensed lightning that suddenly shot out. Pooh! The vampire's face was hit directly by the lightning beam, but only a small burn mark appeared. He raised his head because of this. The satisfaction of drinking blood gradually woke him up from his confused and thirsty state, and the scarlet light in his eyes condensed slightly. Who am I? Where am I? What do I need to do? These 3 questions hit him straight to the heart. Fragmented memories gradually emerged. Vlad, I'm Vlad. I've revived. I'm back. Vlad the vampire stood up abruptly, his blood cloak fluttering behind him. Poison Fong. The patterns on the mage pattern moray eel turned from golden to dark green. Thick venom dripped from its sharp teeth, and it bit down on Vlad's finger. Vlad raised his left hand and stared at the demon pattern moray eel. Bang! The magic pattern ocean eel was crushed. Betty's face was pale. Her duel results were not outstanding, and her ability to deal with unexpected situations was also very ordinary. According to White's description, other than the minotaur that appeared once in a while, there were only a few bats in the tunnel. As the crowd receded, the changes that had occurred in the secret passage also returned to normal. The traps and mechanisms disappeared one after another. This gave her the illusion that the secret passage was no longer a threat. However, what was happening in front of her eyes was madly challenging her judgment. Vampire. Is it a magic fairy? Or is it a real vampire? Three-eyed squid. The three-eyed squid was summoned by Sea Keat. As soon as it appeared, it suddenly sprayed out pitch-black ink. Vlad was still in a state of transition from confusion to clarity when the squid ink sprayed all over his face. He was furious and suddenly wiped his face with his hand. However, just as his slender fingers wiped away the ink on his eyes, a sharp flash entered his vision and quickly magnified. The water monkey's fingernails shone with a sharp light as it flew over under the cover of the ink, trying to gouge out his eyeballs. Scram! Vlad suddenly let out an explosive roar. The blood cloak wriggled, and a blood-red hand reached out from the shoulder and slapped the water monkey away at the critical moment. The water monkey slammed into the wall and slid down like a piece of paper. The atmosphere froze for a moment. Vlad's action of slapping 2 magic fairies to death caused panic. Luobo's scream was late, but it arrived. The sudden change caused Betty, Sea Keat, and Luobo to wake up with a start. However, the 3 of them still had half of their bodies hidden in their sleeping bags. White was the same, with only his hands exposed. The bite wound on his neck had mostly healed in this moment, but the blood he lost wouldn't regenerate so quickly. The hormones in the vampire's fangs made him calm down. He couldn't even think of resisting. The vampire Vlad revealed his malevolence in front of the 4 students. His consciousness was muddled after his resurrection, and now he was finally a bit more awake, But the fragmented memories in his brain weren't enough to support him to understand the situation. He was like a newborn child. Apart from his name, he only had the instincts of a vampire and the arrogance rooted in his bones. However, this didn't prevent him from seeing White and the others as the lower end of the food chain. In other words, they were food. The difference in the ecology of the races made the conflict between the purebred vampires and humans irreconcilable. This was similar to the relationship between the majority of demons and humans. Only when one side died would the war end. However, a centipede would die but not fall down. Not to mention the demons. Vlad's resurrection was highly contingent, but in astrology, it was called inevitable. In the words of the prophets, it was fate. A prophet whose ashes had been scattered once said that the human race and the demon race were two sides of the same coin, light and darkness. As long as the human race existed, the demon race wouldn't be truly destroyed. Prophets used this as the keynote to repeatedly predict the return of the demon race. It was as if they would lose their jobs if they didn't predict this. Dark clouds rolled in the sky outside the castle, as if a storm was coming. "Who are you?" Luobote's question broke the silence. Vlad turned to look at him, his nose twitching slightly, a look of disgust in his eyes. The more noble a vampire was, the more picky he was about his food. Not just anyone could be lucky enough to become his food. Of the 4 people present, only White and Betty were qualified to become his food. And White was the only one who was qualified to receive his embrace. He ignored Luobote's question and looked down at White, the corners of his mouth gradually widening to reveal his shining fangs. "Feel the glory. You will become Vlad's first blood thrall." Blood thrall to blood demon, and then to vampire. This was a necessary advancement process for a non-hereditary vampire. The hormones in White's blood vessels had finally diluted during this process. His eyes suddenly widened, a look of fear in them. Accepting a vampire's embrace, becoming a vampire's blood thrall, was a path he had never thought of. Not only was it a denial of himself, it was also an insult to the hero bloodline. White struggled with all his might to escape from the sleeping bag. Almost at the same time, Betty and Seakeet also took advantage of this opportunity to move. The two of them got out of their sleeping bags and reached for the card pouches at their waists. Vlad had plenty of room for their actions. Not only did he not stop them, he even crossed his arms over his chest and chuckled. Satiety and desire. He had just had a full meal, so he naturally wanted to have some fun. He was just a mere human. Troll. In the end, White was the first to summon his magic guide spirit. He had achieved a breakthrough in his extreme state, further compressing the casting time of a normal summoning spell. The huge monster descended from the sky and charged at the vampires without any fear of death. "Inferior species," Vlad sneered. He raised his hand, and 2 magic arrays appeared in his palms. The magic arrays were mainly black and red, one rotating clockwise and the other counterclockwise. An enormous amount of magic power instantly erupted. A beam of crimson magic light shot out from the magic arrays. The troll's head instantly exploded. Boom. The headless corpse fell heavily to the ground. Seeing the troll he was so proud of being killed so easily, White's face grew paler and paler. He struggled to support himself against the wall and kicked Luobote, who was still in a daze in his sleeping bag. Luobote suddenly woke up and scrambled out of his sleeping bag. "Run!" White could only say these 2 words. His fingers, which were holding the Serpent of Radiance, were trembling violently. He had never felt such great fear before. It was the same even in the Temple of the Moon on the eve of Halloween. At that time, everyone was injected with the soulless water, and he was the only one who was awake. This even made him feel somewhat superior. He was manipulated to attack Dake when the opportunity presented itself, but deep down he didn't think anything would happen to him. He wasn't the one who faced the goddess directly. He only witnessed everything from the side, like an outsider who had mistakenly entered the script. But this time he was the main character. Just like the main character in a fairy tale, he was the center of the event, the one targeted by evil. He had to pull himself together. He couldn't panic. He had to find a way out. Mirage of the Sea City. Betty raised her right hand the moment the troll fell to the ground. and the magic card in her palm released an extremely intense rainbow light. A dreamy image was projected in the secret passage. It was light and shadow that flowed like water waves, and scrupulously filled with rich colors that separated people's vision from each other. The rolling waves set off surging sounds, as if the waves were constantly crashing against the shore. The vampire finally showed a hint of surprise. He reached out and touched the waves in front of his eyes. He actually felt a trace of real coldness. But other than that, there was nothing else. This Mirage of the Sea City wasn't completed yet. It was just one of Betty's research projects. The Mirage of the Sea City should be able to project the opponent's magic fairy and trap them in an illusion. But now this Mirage of the Sea City was just a landscape card. Other than being used for viewing, it could only be used as a means of interference. After the initial surprise, Vlad rolled up his cloak and let the blood flow out. Then, the cloak suddenly shrank and broke the illusion. But as the illusion disappeared, there was no one in the secret passage. White and the other three had disappeared. In a secret room full of mirrors. The four held their breaths, cold sweat dripping down their foreheads. Hiding in such a narrow secret room with only one entrance wasn't a good idea. However, the strength displayed by the vampire's every move was too terrifying. Other than avoiding the battle, there was no other way. "White, are you okay?" Luoboat asked nervously. "I heard that after being bitten by a vampire, you will become a vampire." Victor seemed to have only just realized this, and his already pale face suddenly became distorted. At this moment, only Betty's voice was still calm. "It's not that bad. Only humans who are embraced by vampires will become blood slaves. Open your eyelids and see if they've turned red." White quickly opened his eyelids with his fingers. He wanted to look at the mirror, but Luoboat had already come over nervously. After a while he relaxed and said, "It's still black." White was relieved. "It seems that only my blood was sucked out." At this moment, the after-effects of having his blood sucked out flooded his brain. He suddenly felt weak in his limbs and was mentally exhausted. Even his eyelids became heavy. Keat said in fear. "What's going on? Why are there vampires in the secret passage?" "White, how would I know, Luoboat? We've met the Minotaur before, but that was a long time ago." Keat held his head. "Damn it, we probably won't be able to get out. If I die here, what will happen to my parents? What will happen to my family? I'm the last hope of my family." Luoboat panicked. "No way, we survived the Moon Goddess incident. The professors will come and save us, right?" White squeezed out a sentence. "The professors aren't the only ones who saved us." Betty finally shouted impatiently, "Quiet!" As the strongest fighter among the four of them, Betty had never felt such great pressure before. Ever since she had escaped into the secret chamber, she had begun to summon. Now, she had sacrificed 2 first-tier magic spirits and successfully summoned a second-tier magic spirit. However, a second-tier magic spirit was not enough. Her magic-patterned moray eel was the type with abundant magic power. In the form of a poison-type magic pattern, its magic power and defense were more than 2,500 points. This meant that Vlad's attack power was more than 2,500 points. It was at least a 6-star monster. She had to summon a 3rd-tier magic spirit to have a chance of winning. However, the 3rd-tier magic guide fairy she currently possessed was only a 7-star white card. If I use other magic cards... Betty quickly calculated the difference in power between the two sides and tried to reduce it to an acceptable level. Outside the secret chamber, Vlad had already found this secret chamber by following their scent. But he just stood outside, imagining the human child curled up like a mouse in the secret room, shivering, and then laughing hideously. On the other side, Dake had a beautiful dream. 2 in 1 for 1,000 words. I didn't do well yesterday. Try to come back early in the afternoon. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.